Episode 346, the release of the first episode. Mr. Rostron, who had turned back to pick things up, took the voltmeter from her. He frowned and spoke in a tight voice.
"What are you doing?"
Bessy looked back at him. She pinched her fingers tightly. Because of her pale skin, the blood vessels were very obvious. Outside, Sarah appeared wearing regular clothes and a black coat. She came in and quickly said, "Mr. Rostron, I asked her to clean up the laboratory."
"She won't need to clean up the experiments here in the future."
Mr. Rostron looked away blankly. He was antisocial, and the content of his research was all secrets of the Research Institute. Neither he nor Sarah and Elijah had expected there to be a new student. Sarah nodded. Mr. Rostron had strict schedules, and he was as rigorous as a robot. He raised his hand to check the time before going out for dinner. Sarah and Elijah quickly followed. Pausing, Elijah turned around to comfort Bessy. "You just entered the laboratory and don't understand a lot of things. Mr. Rostron's personality is like that. When I first came here, the research he was doing was also very important, and many things were forbidden to me. You should finish memorizing the manual first, then familiarize yourself with the laboratory. You'll be more accustomed to things in a month or so." Bessy expressionlessly walked out with her scarf on. Outside of the laboratory's gate, Michael's car was parked not far away. He had probably been standing outside for a while and was now sitting against the front of the car, his figure long and slender. He leaned one hand on the car and held his phone with the other. The laboratory was a restricted area and not many people came and went. Noticing someone coming out, he looked up and saw that it was Bessy. The streetlight outside was dim, and her expression couldn't be seen clearly. However, she looked to be in low spirits. Raising an eyebrow, he stood up, waiting for her to approach him before embracing her.
"Something happened?"
He only knew today that she had entered the laboratory. He had been to the laboratory before as well, but his situation had been different at that time. The entire medical laboratory belonged to the Clark family, so the laboratory had been under his control. However, Bessy's situation was different. He calmly thought of Mr. Rostron, whom she had mentioned to him before. Narrowing his eyes, he reminded himself to get people to look into him. Nothing. Bessy pulled him down to her and rested her head on his shoulder. After calming down for about 5 minutes, she raised her head. "Let's go home." Rosemary and Joshua were both in the Highline apartments. The chef had prepared a meal for Bessy, but she didn't return at the usual time. Marvin told Joshua and Rosemary to go ahead and eat, but they didn't want to. It wasn't until 7:30 that Bessy came back to start the meal. "Bessy, did you go to the laboratory today?" asked Rosemary as she picked up her fork. Michael looked up, glanced at her, and said in an emotionless voice,
"She didn't. Didn't I mention it to you an hour ago?"
Rosemary resisted the urge to roll her eyes at him. "No, I wanted to know which teacher she was with." She glanced at Bessy again, smiling, showing kindness on her graceful face. This time as well, it was Michael who slowly replied to her.
"Mr. Rostron, a special teacher in the Research Institute. Any other questions?"
Rosemary was speechless. Was she asking him? She reminded herself about the deficit several times.
"Oh, a special grade teacher."
Joshua also looked up in surprise and thought for a while.
"Northwestern Memorial Hospital has only 6 special researchers, so you're lucky to meet one of them."
Simons then reminded him,
"Mr. Clark, there are only 5 special researchers in Northwestern Memorial Hospital." "Wasn't it 6?
Taken aback, Joshua suddenly remembered something and nodded. He turned to Bessy again, his eyebrows slightly raised.
"Bessy, perform well. That Mr. Rostron will definitely accept you as a student."
Generally, special researchers didn't casually accept students. They controlled part of the confidential content. But at this time, Simons didn't dare to remind Joshua of this. After all, he also felt that given Bessy's qualifications, he wouldn't be surprised if she was accepted as a student by a special researcher. Gripping his fork and looking up, Michael indifferently stared at Joshua.
"Dad, is the food not delicious?"
Joshua was stunned.
"It's delicious."
Michael looked away and lazily said,
"Good."
Everyone except Marvin got the hint. They realized that Michael was chiding Joshua for talking too much. Nobody dared to speak after that, and the chef who collected the bowls didn't even dare to look at Michael.
Bessy.
After the meal, Joshua stayed behind and sat down opposite Bessy with a cup of tea. Hugging a pillow, Bessy rested her head on it and took out her phone to open Twitter. She looked up at him with clear eyes. Joshua lowered his head to take a sip of the tea, coughing slightly.
You've finished your assessment. Are you still busy?
Not really. Bessy changed her posture. Joshua nodded. He fell silent again. Beside him, Simon's lip twitched, and he turned to Rosemary, who had gone downstairs to watch Marvin's big screen and was just walking back upstairs now.
Miss, the clothes you ordered have been sent to the old house.
Hearing this, she narrowed her eyes. What clothes?
The clothes you'll wear on your father's birthday next week.
Simons respectfully replied. Rosemary calmly looked away. I understand. Dad, I've already prepared a gift, but you can tell me what you want in advance. Joshua waved his hand as if he didn't care too much.
Why would you prepare a gift? It's just another birthday, not a big celebration. It's unnecessary.
Casually opening Mr. Cheatham's profile, Bessy heard this and looked up. Bessy, a few people will come on that day, as well as a security guard you're familiar with. Rosemary walked towards her, laughing. We're all a family. Do you want to come and celebrate with us? Our house still has many rooms. Squinting, Bessy was deep in thought. She didn't respond for a while. Joshua pretended to calmly drink tea. After about 2 minutes, she looked up, her eyes clear. I'll see how busy I am. She didn't agree nor refuse, so it was still negotiable. Good. This was much better than Joshua had expected. After all, he had invited her during the festival before, but she had refused without hesitation. After sitting for a while with the teacup in his hand, he left with his hands behind his back. Bessy was still sitting on the sofa typing a message to send to Mr. Cheatham. Is the black book on your shelf still there? The account labeled neighbor replied with question marks. Squinting, Bessy thought for a while, then typed another message. Chicago, computer store, the 6th book on the 4th floor of the 2nd column of the bookshelf. After a few minutes, he replied with 2 messages. I've told you many times, it's not called a black book. That's the Hacker Alliance's programming book. Bessy squinted at the last line and was silent for a moment. It was indeed a black book with a black cover and a few stiff white horizontal and vertical lines as decoration. A few irregular white letters were also written. But it was black. According to Mr. Cheatham, it was an impressive cover that some hackers had specially developed. It seriously was the Hacker Alliance's programming book. She typed another message. Do you still have it? On the other end of the conversation, Mr. Cheatham pushed his glasses up and blankly typed a message. It's still in Fairfield, but I can get you a new one in a few days. A few days, and it was finally Friday. Bessy's schedule was packed. After class, she received a message from Principal White. She thought for a while and thought that he must want to explain the experimental task assigned to her. She took her backpack and went to see him. At the same time, in Laboratory B317, Elijah hurriedly walked in with a bunch of documents. The new student sorted out the data very quickly yesterday. He handed the documents to Mr. Rostron and suddenly thought of something. Have you seen her today? He asked Sarah. Putting away the transformer she was working with and returning to read her papers, Sarah just looked up, glanced outside, and shook her head, not caring too much. Maybe she can't accept the gap between us. Those in Northwestern University's Science and Technology department weren't ordinary, especially those who could pass the laboratory test. They were considered geniuses. But who wasn't a genius in the laboratory? Here, apart from the formal researchers, who had the capacity to be arrogant? Every year, a certain number of people passed the laboratory test, but only a few could enter the research institute. The mentors and professors were used to this and naturally wouldn't coddle the new students like the outside world. It was normal that those proud children couldn't stand being ignored for the first time by their instructors and would stop coming. After several blows of neglect, they would come obediently. Hearing Sarah's words while flipping through his book, Mr. Rostron frowned lightly. He continued doing his experiment. I'm going to work on my paper. Sarah was carefully continuing to revise the paper she planned to submit to SCI. She was a member of Mr. Rostron's laboratory, and everyone in the laboratory, including her, wanted to become his student. Elijah had published 3 papers. Sarah had just published a paper and was researching other projects in the same area during this time. In a private restaurant near Northwestern University, Bessy sat face-to-face with Principal White.
Research about this.
Principal White handed her a document. She put down her fork and took a look. It was a slightly complicated research material on a computer science subject.
Every year, the laboratory recommends candidates for the Research Institute.
Principal White ate a piece of food before slowly speaking.
Luke took his private team abroad to participate in a research project at the end of September and is now in the Research Institute. From freshman year to now, 10 research topics have been published on SCI, and they have been jointly promoted to the Research Institute. Those students are now in the 3rd level.
Principal White looked at Bessy. He particularly emphasized the 10 SCI research papers, dragging out the words. He was giving heavy hints. Bessy closed the document. Her reply was slow. Episode 347, The Comment Session. I got it. Reaching out to pull over her backpack, she put the research document inside.
Luke wrote the paper very diligently,
said Principal White as he picked up a spoonful of vegetables. Casually throwing her backpack aside, Bessy glanced at him and calmly said, He's very diligent in law studies as well. I heard he's been looking for a professor to mentor him. Luke was good at everything. He also set aside 1 day every week to study the law and didn't even go to the laboratory. Because of his achievements in science, his teacher tried to earnestly exhort him, but still failed to persuade him. The teacher couldn't beat or scold him, so he finally found a law professor for him. Principal White paused and then kindly said,
Of course, the experimental projects are more important. SCI papers and the likes can be done slowly. There's no rush.
Bessy looked away from him and continued eating, with her legs crossed. The two finished their meal. It was already 6 in the evening. She didn't walk out with Principal White, but saw Michael's car parked by the road immediately. It wasn't Michael in the driver's seat, but Patrick instead. She opened the door of the back seat and got in. Michael was still reading a document when she got in. He closed the folder and put it aside. Leaning over casually, his eyes were clear and his tone was casual.
Have you eaten?
Yeah. Bessy put her backpack casually on her lap. In the driver's seat, Patrick glanced at the rearview mirror and respectfully asked,
Miss Miller, should we go back to the Highline Apartments or the experimental?
He suddenly paused. A few days ago, Michael had asked him to check on Mr. Rostron, so he knew he was a special researcher in the Research Institute. Having checked on his information, he found that they were first-level encrypted. Without 129's help, he couldn't do much more than check on his general character. Most of what he was asked to search was about Bessy. Recently, Michael didn't even let others mention the laboratory. Patrick paused mid-sentence. Resting her chin in her hand, Bessy glanced at him and casually smiled. Ever since Monday night, she had been in a bad mood and was a little impatient. Fortunately, she had calmed down after returning to the Highline Apartments. But Michael kept it in mind. He had reacted very strongly, especially when Joshua spoke. Bessy leaned against the door and chuckled. She really didn't care about the things in the laboratory. Rosemary, Joshua, Dean Soup, and the others all hoped she could find a good teacher in the laboratory, and that it was best to achieve an apprenticeship to Mr. Rostron, because Mr. Rostron was one of the 5 special research fellows in the Research Institute. But they didn't know that Bessy had not gone to the laboratory to find a teacher. She had already been apprenticed by Principal White. She had gone to the laboratory to do projects and research. According to Principal White, he wanted her to participate in international project research like Luke. Of course, it would be even better if she could write a few professional SCI papers and add more academic content to the laboratory. 10 minutes later, the car arrived at the parking lot. They got out of the car and headed upstairs. Patrick parked the car and followed them up with the car keys. Upstairs, Marvin was having a video call with Mary's father, asking him if the flowers and leaves would wilt every winter and discussing if there was a problem with his cultivation method. When Bessy and Michael came in, he said goodbye to Mary's father and hung up. On the other end of the phone, Mary's father turned to look at Mary, who was holding an economics book, and sighed at Mary's mother.
Marvin is a really good gardener.
On the other end of the phone, Marvin hung up and went to retrieve a package from the side of the door. He handed it to Bessy.
Miss Miller, your package.
Bessy took off her coat and scarf and put them aside. She checked the date and guessed that this express package was probably Mr. Cheatham's black book. So she didn't open it and prepared to directly send it to Tucker. She received a cup of tea from Marvin and took a sip, her slender fingers holding the courier box. Leaning back on the sofa, she glanced at Marvin, lowered her voice, and raised an eyebrow. "Why are you staring at me?" He pointed to the package in her hand and curiously asked,
Miss Miller, what's that?
Bessy threw the package to him and placed the teacup on the coffee table. Without looking up, she took out her phone and said, "Look for yourself." Marvin took a pair of scissors to open the package. Patrick, who was talking to Michael, also looked at him. After carefully tearing open the outer packaging, he saw a black book inside. It had a very ugly cover and a bunch of numbers he couldn't understand inside. He was speechless. Then, he remembered that Bessy was a hacker. He couldn't understand it. He stared at it for a while, closed it, handed it respectfully to Bessy, and said expressionlessly,
Miss Miller.
The next day, it was finally Saturday, much to the netizens' joy. At 8 p.m., Bessy was downstairs in Marvin's room at the Highline Apartments. She was sitting on the carpet holding a pillow and leaning lazily against the sofa. Rosemary, Michael, and Marvin were all sitting on the sofa. Rosemary had been thinking about coming here to watch the premiere ever since she heard about Marvin's super large screen last time. Marvin sat at the very edge of the couch. At 7:59, Patrick walked out of his room silently, holding a glass of water. He walked to the edge of the sofa next to Marvin and sat down. Eating a potato chip, Marvin blankly looked up and said,
Patrick. Yeah?
Patrick took a sip of water and absent-mindedly replied to him. Marvin ate more potato chips and glanced at him without speaking. His eyes seemed to be asking, "Why are you here?" Patrick didn't reply. He lowered his head and silently drank the water. At 8 o'clock, all the major channels would simultaneously broadcast in conjunction with the online APP platform. The title sequence with music played at the beginning of the show, and then the program name was displayed, 24-Hour Idol. At the same time, the synchronization meant the online netizens were appearing cheekily. "Hello everyone, welcome to 8-Hour Idol.
It's time to watch 8 Hours Idol again."
The program began after the last episode had left off. It showed the moment when Ava met with Zeke. The netizens started commenting about Ava.
I know this girl. She's the one who was on the hot search last month. Does everyone remember?
Ava, I know her. This young lady looks very distinctive. I don't know why she has never been popular.
She's actually not Northwestern University's school nerd, but is an entertainer? I've guessed wrong. Maybe the program group strictly forbade her from bringing school nerds.
Ha ha ha,
the stupid program group must have been afraid it would become 2-Hour Idol.
On the screen, Bessy's eyes fell at the end of the road, and to Katie's question about what her other friend did, she casually replied, "A singer." There were more comments.
Singer? An entertainer as well? Why isn't he here yet? Is he late?
I want to see who it is. Who dares to be late in front of big movie stars like this? At the same time, the scene cut to the end of the road, not far away. The production crew hadn't expected much from Bessy in the beginning, and the shots were mostly focused on Zeke and the others. Only one very distant full-field shot faced the remote road, which couldn't be seen clearly. While Bessy was talking to Katie, this shot had already captured the 3 blurry figures at the end of the road. As they approached, 2 of the people seemed to be assistants, who immediately avoided the camera. The audience could vaguely see Bessy's guest wearing sunglasses. Not all the comments were positive. This person even brought his assistants? Isn't the point that he's even wearing sunglasses? I inexplicably don't like this guest. This show isn't even a top big name, and the filming venue has already been booked by the show, so nobody will see him. Is he even more famous than Zeke? Pretentious. I don't like him either. +1. Indeed, his first impression isn't very good, but since he's invited by Bessy, I will watch it. Comment section, don't be so malicious, okay? He's just wearing a mask, not stealing your food. What if he has just caught a cold?
I just want to see who it is.
On the screen, a thin figure with his back facing the camera spoke with an almost clear and slightly ethereal voice.
I'm sorry for coming late.
As a singer, other than his talents, Noah also had a unique voice. His personal mannerisms were distinctive in the music industry as well. Some musicians said that no one in the music world would be able to replicate his success. Hearing his voice dropped a bomb on the audience watching.
Shit, I must have hallucinated.
Me too.
Stupid camera, what's wrong with you? Can't you move? I'm so anxious to see. Production crew, you're doing it on purpose, right?
While everyone was anxiously commenting, the scene suddenly switched to Noah's face as he politely greeted Zeke. The young man lowered his eyes, his expression calm, beautiful, and somewhat obedient. Like a rookie. 24-Hour Idol had already been very popular initially and had completely exploded because of the story between Zeke and Bessy. Thus, the comment section had been densely filled at the beginning. However, at this time, the comment section on all the broadcast platforms suddenly stopped, as if the autumn wind had swept the fallen leaves, leaving only 2 or 3 comments. Then suddenly, the comments screen showed everyone's shock.
Who am I? Where am I? What did I just see?
I actually have the chance to see Noah on a reality show in my lifetime. I'm crying. Production crew, are you gods?
This is really once in a lifetime.
Production crew, I salute to you.
Not much to say. This production crew is amazing.
Isn't he Bessy's friend?
Hurry, everyone. Hand the cigarette to the big boss.
Before the program even ended, the hot search on Twitter had already updated. Episode 348, Northwestern University's School Nerd. Noah and 2 Kings in One Kingdom were the top searches. Twitter soon exploded. The overworked programmer who finally had time to watch the live broadcast at home was called back to work overtime as soon as it started. After all these years, Noah had become famous. He was initially popular for his music and later because of his distinct style in the entertainment industry. He didn't accept endorsements, commercials, or movies. He just wanted to do music and never tried to create hype on the internet. Fans could only see him through concerts and music videos. Someone had once made a post that described Noah by saying it was more difficult to watch him participate in non-music activities than it was to discover how the universe began. Although it was a joke, it also highlighted the difficulty of Noah appearing on shows. On the hot search, someone dug out that post, made by the account Appreciate When Drunk, and reposted it, saying, "The only prophet in the audience. Turn on the lights, shine me to death."
What the hell? Brother, you're famous.
Open the door, Noah is really here. Naturally, many netizens didn't like to watch the real-time live stream and wanted to watch the replay after the broadcast. Many of Noah's fans only focused on him and were not paying attention to the show. Seeing the hot search that was almost paralyzed with results about Noah, they reluctantly opened the live stream. The popularity indicator displayed on the upper right corner of the live stream was increasing at an exponential speed. At this time, the program showed them dividing into teams and then heading off to find clues. On the sofa, Rosemary crossed her legs. She looked at the missions set by the production crew and smiled at Bessy.
In order to turn the tides against you, the production crew will target you the whole time,
she said. It was obvious that this episode was meant to make things harder for Bessy. She leaned back silently. Michael lazily raised an eyebrow.
Turn the tides against her? Just look at how they gave shooting missions, slicing parts, paintings, and putting together components. It's so obvious they're trying to get her to fail.
Rosemary picked up her teacup and felt like something was wrong with Michael's indifferent expression. The comments agreed with Rosemary.
Ha 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 ha, the production crew has expressed their fear.
Well, it has been determined that this episode is indeed 24-hour idle. Bessy's group was relatively undisciplined, while Zeke's group had already found some clues from the shooting mission. Undoubtedly, many scenes were of Zeke. Sierra's performance was also remarkable, but because of everything that had happened last week, even if she did nothing, people were still mad that she existed in the show. The audience simply didn't want to see her and was convinced it was a setup even if she performed well.
Does anyone remember the post on the forum about Bessy shooting during her military training?
Someone in the comments asked.
Me, I remember. Why didn't she go to clear the shooting mission? Is archery different from the shooting in military training?
I just want to see Bessy's heroic shooting. However, on the screen, Bessy had already stated that she wouldn't participate in the shooting and gave it up to Zeke. She even took Ava and the others to see the ghosts in the old house. The production was well funded and the ghost house's decorations were gloomy and terrifying. Bessy and her party of 4 had just entered the old house. Through the screen, the chill coming from the soles of their feet could be felt. A female ghost in a red wedding gown suddenly popped out. With a pale face and black hair hanging down, her face was covered, and only the back of her head could be seen. Even Rosemary was shocked, as if she was watching a horror movie. The comment section was full of shit, worried that Bessy and Noah would be scared to tears. However, they only saw Bessy directly walk past the female ghost, seemingly commenting on the old house. Noah and Ava politely asked the female ghost sister if there was a checkpoint here. Katie's cousin asked seriously,
"Can you twist your head off like in the movies?"
The female ghost was speechless.
"I guess not. You're just a copycat ghost."
He was extremely disappointed. The female ghost was speechless. The real-time comments went wild. Ha 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 ha, to hell with this whole team of insensitive boys and girls.
I feel distressed for the ghost sister, but I really want to die laughing.
Online seeking the female ghost psychological thoughts. 20 minutes had passed since the beginning of the show, so almost a quarter of the episode was over. Zeke's group had 2 mission cards at this time. The comment section also began to get impatient.
Zeke is spoiling his niece. He actually gave her the shooting mission's card that he worked so hard to obtain.
I mean, just look at her face. I also think they're just messing around, but I still like watching it. Ha 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 ha.
Noah, your voice will be heard no matter what.
The scene showed Bessy handing the barbecue to Noah. Then she typed a string of codes in the computer, and a high-level clue popped up. The comment section was filled with question marks. The program slowly turned to Bessy, leading Ava and the others to the violin mission.
Ha ha ha, they're finally doing a mission, but Zeke and the others have been there already. The old man at the mission point didn't even lift his head. It's a little difficult.
The next second after this comment, the old man in the scene passed the advanced clues to Bessy very neatly. He also chatted familiarly with Ava. The audience was shocked.
WTF? Shit, ha ha ha, it looks like Ava is the big boss in the violin world. Program group, are you anxious now? It'll only be for 8 hours again today.
I was wrong. Today's show is still 8-hour idle. Zeke was watching the live stream with the people in the studio. Zeke and Bessy had been recorded separately on this episode, so other than the last game clue, neither he nor his manager knew how she had obtained the high-level clues. They were especially surprised since Zeke and his team had been to the violin checkpoint as well. But Mr. Sampson standing guard there hadn't even lifted his head. Among the audience, some people recognized Mr. Sampson.
How rich is the production crew to even invite Mr. Sampson?
As one of the violin teachers in the Evanston Violin Association, Mr. Sampson's status in the violin world wasn't low. A few comments on the comment section asked the same thing.
This is Mr. Sampson?
I will sternly remind everyone online, everyone, go search Evanston Violin Association. Some people had already noticed this comment, but most people were still watching the live stream and didn't exit the screen. In Zeke's studio, the manager sipped his coffee and finally got to see the answer to the unsolved mystery at the violin mission point.
Oh, it turns out to be because of Ava. Her violin playing must have been very impressive.
Yeah. Zeke looked at the phone in his hands, his expression calm and elegant as always. The production crew naturally wouldn't air Mr. Sampson's conversation with the director. Without understanding the inside information, and with Mr. Sampson continuously talking to Ava, most people assumed that he had given them the high-level clue because of her. The show moved on to the lunch scene. There was a close-up shot of the hotel discounts for the poker tournament levels. I have confirmed with my eyes, this production crew is a fan of the poker tournament. It's over. Noah only does music.
Zeke is also an old man.
Katie is a stubborn scrap iron. Bessy, Noah, and the others ordered a whole table of dishes. On the screen, Zeke gave a very slow answer.
Marriage can wait a few years. It's not on my mind for now.
After finishing the meal, everyone in the comments section was waiting for them to wash the plates. The whole screen was filled with ha 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 until Bessy sat in front of the computer and logged into her account. Supreme level. 20 stars. The screen of ha 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 immediately disappeared. The whole comment section was instantly at a loss. Because the camera was a little far and the computer screen wasn't big, the scene only just flashed by. Most people only noticed her hand speed and not when Toby invited her to play. The production crew also very coldly didn't zoom in on this. Bessy's game lasted for only 8 minutes, and the production crew had to reluctantly cut it into half, including the replay of the game. After watching the live stream, Zeke stood up, absent-mindedly plucked at his sleeves, and then drove Tucker home.
Tucker.
He took his key and walked them out before asking,
Do you like computers?
Putting his phone in his pocket and wrapping his scarf around his neck, Tucker remained silent and only nodded. Zeke opened the door for Tucker and then got into the driver's seat, turning to look at him.
I'll find you another impressive teacher. You're so smart you should understand what Jack and I want you to do. You have the chance to make a decision.
Got it. Tucker lowered his head and slowly played a game on his phone. That was his way of expressing his agreement.
Good. You're just like part of the Miller family.
Zeke reached out to caress his head. Glancing out of the window, his clear eyes darkened.
We're going to have a big war next. Don't worry.
The fourth son would find out about Tucker's existence eventually. He had to find a way to fight against the fourth son. After Zeke and Tucker left, the studio fell into silence.
This pair of siblings is very impressive at games. Is Bessy really that good?
Someone asked. The people in the studio basically all played the poker tournament, which had swept the whole world. The manager calmly took a sip of coffee and glanced at the others. Watching the live stream wasn't as exciting as seeing it in real life. He shrugged.
I don't know. The netizens will find out.
He took another sip of coffee. He was also curious, but he didn't dare to ask. But the netizens were a magnifying glass. The studio people silently lowered their heads, took out their phones, and opened the video app. They clicked on 24-Hour Idol and rewatched the last 10 minutes. Just like them, the majority of the netizens were rewatching the broadcast. Amongst these people, there were naturally fans of the poker tournament. Some people also remembered the comments about Mr. Sampson and went to search for the Evanston Violin Association. Netizens always went over programs with a magnifying glass and couldn't wait to pull out all the antics from celebrities for examination. Episode 349. Angry Netizens. At the Highline Apartments, Rosemary and the others had also finished watching the show.
Shall we go see your brother tomorrow?
Michael got up from the sofa. He casually pulled Bessy up as well. Bessy still had the black book with her. Getting up, she threw aside the pillow in her arms and followed him upstairs, her hands casually holding the book. I'll see. These past 2 days, she had been studying the experimental project between her and Principal White. The two continued talking and headed upstairs. Behind them, Rosemary and Patrick exchanged glances. They were a little surprised. Although they didn't play games professionally, they understood the situation after seeing Supreme Level 20 stars pop up on Bessy's account, as well as the stunned comment section and how the internet blew up afterward. Only Marvin watched the show expressionlessly. How is Bessy's level so high? Rosemary folded her arms and lowered her voice. She remembered Sherry only had 1 star. Rosemary didn't play games, but Sherry had been popular in Evanston, so she had mentioned it to Rosemary and Sebastian when she attended their banquet. Marvin finished his bag of chips and threw the trash into the trash can. Hearing this, he simply shook his head. He didn't know. Rosemary looked away and left thoughtfully after bidding farewell to Bessy and Michael. At the same time, on Twitter, someone had edited together a video from all the clips of Bessy playing. They posted it with the caption, "A school nerd comparable to professional players." The hot search for this rose to second place after Noah. Other than his fans, other poker tournament fans also clicked on the video.
I edited the footage of the restaurant questioned by the game masters.
This can be on the hot search as well?
This Sierra is only a 1-star level and is considered good in the entertainment industry, but in the esports circle, she's only an ordinary passerby.
At this thought, the comment section suddenly went crazy. Nuclear energy warning ahead.
Famous scene. Watch it 1 billion times.
Bessy's large-scale slaughter of fans on the scene.
I recommend you to pause at 234, 250, and 327 to watch the game interface. Bessy's hand speed is too fast. Try watching it a few more times.
Some netizens couldn't download it and just went straight to the comment section. Sure enough, 3 screenshots were found in the most popular comment. First screenshot. Toby invited Bessy to play a game. Second screenshot. Bessy's game friends. The first page was all supreme level and above. Third screenshot. Her record. The netizens went crazy over these screenshots. I'm crying. She has god-level friends. She's probably played with the sun god.
How did she get 20 stars? What kind of girl is she?
After they worshipped the game gods, some people became microscopes and began to examine the video.
Does anyone remember the final tour of the Devil City OST competition last year? Don't guess. I'll just tell you. At BM.
There are too few old fans. Many have forgotten the winter game that abused their hearts 4 years ago. Let me point the way to Poker Tournament's official goods store.
The hotel owner is a first-generation fan.
I'm crying. Neither Zeke nor the program team expected Twitter to explode again within an hour after the broadcast. They were still in Zeke's studio. Because of the broadcast today, the studio people had been working overtime for fear of trouble. But fortunately, no trouble was caused after the broadcast. They were preparing to pack their things and leave work. The person in charge of the studio's official Twitter was surprised to see the private messages and the increasing number of fans on his page. So many comments? Some people had followed this Twitter because of watching the show. The manager knew that some netizens had already dug out the show editing where Toby invited Bessy. Not surprised, he calmly asked,
"Was Toby exposed?"
The staff was silent.
"What's wrong?"
With no work tonight, the manager had put on his coat and was prepared to head home. Seeing the staff's reaction, he couldn't help but pause and ask again. A staff member turned his head silently and reached out to hand his phone to the manager.
"They did dig out Toby, but there's something else. Look at it."
The manager reached out for the phone. Twitter's hot search had just been updated again. He originally thought that it would be either Toby or Bessy on the hot search. But unexpectedly, neither of them was there. Even Noah's post that had occupied the hot search for 2 hours had been successfully squeezed to the 4th spot. The first 3 spots were all about the poker tournament. The World Poker Tour's best player. BM. OST Toby Yearling's winter game. What was this weird hot search? It had squeezed Noah's show post out of the first place. Noah was one of the most famous people in the entertainment industry and was a particularly mysterious singer. It was imaginable how much traffic a famous star like him, who never participated in shows, would bring by suddenly showing up. Although 2 hours had already passed since the show, it wasn't something that other hot searches could easily crush at will. The manager looked up.
"Who bought this hot search?"
He clicked on it and followed it to the comments. What he found was people talking about the winter game 4 years ago. He looked through it and saw a link on one of the posts. He looked around and asked the staff behind him,
"This hot search, what does it have to do with us?"
The manager also liked playing games and had archived various console games on his computer. Naturally, he also played the poker tournament, which was popular all over the world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked Bessy about the computer. Squinting, he scanned the tweets with the most replies, stopped to read the most popular comment, and was taken aback. Everyone knew that the other countries were much more adept at poker tournament than America, and also had special teams in addition to the country's ace team. The people on these teams had to be extremely skilled. But even with skill, it was difficult to create or join a team. Every step of becoming a team was extremely expensive, especially the merchandise and touring, which wasn't possible with just money, but required a talented team as well. Most of the domestic teams were grassroots teams and didn't have a donor to spend a pile of money on them, unless they really had faith and passion for this game. For the team to return a profit for the donor and become profitable and famous, they had to have an amazing record. This was also the reason why Toby had taken the world by storm by winning the international winter competition and became famous in the esports circle overnight. In that game, countless people witnessed Team OST's back against the ropes, except for Toby. His teammates, coaches, fans, and spectators had all given up. The audience exploded when he won the competition as an underdog. It wasn't over till it was over. For the first time, the domestic team went to the international competition, and for the first time, they won a trophy. The domestic team had not yet been defeated. All the fans recalled that battle and were full of emotion. They were rendered speechless, and seeing the Winter Game 4 years ago at this time, they could only think of one thing. S4, Winter Games, Toby, Sun God. Those who clicked this hot search were at least poker tournament players, and although they might not know the emotions of the old fans, they knew this. OST was an era. That one win in the Winter Games 4 years ago had created this era. Everyone thought that the World Poker Tour's team had opened this new era for the domestic team. Only today did they realize that it turned out to be an original member of Team OST. The manager looked at the news of the return of the old player and his pupils shrank involuntarily. His fingers trembled as he clicked on the post on Twitter.
Who remembers the first generation of OST members?
He scrolled down further. At such a moment, he couldn't help but feel surging emotions. No wonder this post had squeezed into the hot search. The poker tournament had tens of millions of fans playing nationwide every day, and now, the hot search was about Toby and the Winter Games 4 years ago. It wasn't surprising that this post had exceeded Noah's. The manager was now curious what this had to do with Bessy and recalled the previous 2 posts. He returned and clicked on it again. Following the hot search links, he directly clicked onto BM's Twitter. There was only one following, but she had 10 million fans. 0 Twitter posts. He was stunned to see nothing on this Twitter account. How could netizens have found it? He stared at it for a while, strangely feeling like the BM sounded awfully familiar.
I saw the Twitter account.
He held out the phone to the staff member and sighed involuntarily.
Tonight, the news about the players of the poker tournament is going to explode. I'll definitely see many old players coming back online.
The staff didn't take the phone. The manager squinted slightly.
Take it. I have my own phone.
He was a little excited now and wanted to log into his old account to take a look, as well as to watch the video of the Winter Games from 4 years ago.
No.
The staff shook his head and calmly said,
I didn't ask you to look at the hot search. I want you to read the studio's private messages and comments on Twitter.
At the same time, in the Park Place apartments, Zeke had taken Tucker back. In the apartment, Jack and James were still sitting and chatting at the coffee table, their TV still turned on after watching the live stream. These 2 people were too old to know about being at supreme level with 20 stars, despite knowing about the poker tournament. Because no youngster was around, they had even closed the comment section because they weren't used to it.
Bessy's typing speed seems very fast.
Jack's muddy eyes slightly narrowed as he recalled her first mission where she had taken out the code paper on the wall and typed it. But the show hadn't filmed what the code was, so he couldn't know too much about it. Tilting his head, James's expression was normal.
Bessy also likes to play games. She's even faster when playing games.
Episode 350. A Slap to the Face. Jack nodded. She was indeed fast when playing games.
I also know that youngster, Noah.
He took a sip of tea and continued chatting with James.
He's a singer who's particularly popular on the internet, like Zeke.
Because of Bessy and Tucker, Jack had been far less harsh on James recently. Picking up another melon seed with his long, yellowish and rough fingers, James heard Jack reminiscing and said,
In the past, some scouts also wanted to turn me into a movie star.
At that moment, Zeke and Tucker entered. Jack immediately stood up to help Tucker put away his scarf before turning to Zeke. Patting Tucker's head, Zeke smiled quietly.
Go back and take a bath and rest. We'll continue learning from Mr. Sampson tomorrow.
Tucker nodded and then suddenly said,
Bessy is coming tomorrow. Bessy?
James put down the melon seed and asked excitedly,
When? Is she staying for lunch? She's just coming to give me something and ask a few questions, not eating with us,
Tucker said. Upon hearing this, James's eyes darkened and he muttered, Oh, before slumping down into his chair. Tucker took his phone and went to take a bath in his room. After greeting James, Zeke went downstairs with Jack. Walking slowly, with obvious furrows and fine lines on his face, Jack reached out to press the elevator button and looked up.
Have you mentioned the future to Tucker?
With his usual expression, Zeke put on a mask and nodded. It seemed like Tucker hadn't resisted. Smiling, Jack followed Zeke into the elevator, his eyes darkening.
The fourth son already has suspicions. I'm afraid we won't be able to keep this up for long.
Recently, Ricky had frequently entered and exited the Park Place apartments, so it was normal for the fourth son to grow suspicious. Once he found out, he would surely target Tucker. Instead of parking in the basement garage, Zeke's car was parked in a little lot close to the apartments. His phone rang the moment he got off the elevator. It was his manager. Zeke knew that his manager and the studio people were working overtime and wondered what had happened. He answered the call and held his phone to his ear. The manager's voice was a little calm.
Zeke, have you read the private messages on Twitter?
Zeke got into the driver's seat, turned on the hands-free calling, and put his phone in the console.
No,
he said. There was a moment of silence.
Take a look first. I'll call you again after a minute or so.
He hung up. It must be something important, or the manager wouldn't ask him to look at Twitter right away. Turning off the engine, Zeke kept one hand on the steering wheel, picked up his phone, and opened Twitter. He had turned on Do Not Disturb, but the Twitter homepage still lagged for a moment. His eyebrows were sharp and indifferent as he clicked on it. He directly clicked on the comments. The new comments were all variations of the same thing.
Zeke, Sun God is silent online, so I can only ask you, is BM really your niece?
BM? Since the fan was asking Zeke directly, he clicked on BM's profile. The account had 10 million fans, but completely blank information. But there was a Twitter verification. Team OST's member, BM. He was a little unfamiliar with the name BM on Twitter, but not BM in the game. He had even created a new account to become friends with BM. Were they the same? Was Bessy a member of Team OST? Before he could connect the dots, the manager called again.
Have you seen it?
Still in the studio, the manager stood by the window, opening it a bit to let the smoke from his cigarette out. The white smoke drifted between his fingers.
That BM is an original member of Team OST.
A thread of analysis was already posted on Twitter. Bessy's username, BM, was Team OST's BM. According to Toby's introduction in Devil City, OST BM was Team OST's old member. Netizens again found the powerful video of last year's competition in Devil City. In the video, Bessy was wearing a black mask, but her temperament couldn't be suppressed by it. Through the lens, the strength of her brows and eyes were evident. 4 years ago, only a few people remembered Toby's words on how he had won the championship with his teammates' help. But now, they easily reached a conclusion. BM was Twitter's BM, the teammate Toby was talking about. Before this, Zeke had no idea about the mystery member of Team OST. Upon hearing his manager's word, he chuckled, turned the car back on, and put on his Bluetooth headset. A smile appeared on his usually calm and rigorous face.
Bessy has always been very good at games.
He sounded a little proud of her. He slowly drove the car onto the main road. On the other end of the line, the manager reached out to flick away the soot from his cigarette. Hearing Zeke's words, his deep eyes narrowed and he was silent for a while before he spoke up very lightly.
Zeke, you might not know, but Bessy is very adept in computers and has experience programming. It wasn't unusual to be so skilled in esports games and to also have experience working with computers.
He wouldn't have been so anxious to tell Zeke if it had been someone else. But Bessy could program. The manager knew how vital this was to Zeke and the Miller family. Screech! The car came to a sudden stop in the middle of the road. In the darkness, Zeke slowly raised his head, and his always handsome and indifferent face cracked a little. At the Highline Apartments, Bessy had gotten a shower after sending a message to Tucker. She came out of the shower and was about to turn on her computer when she suddenly stopped. She turned to open the door. Michael was leaning against the doorframe with his hands folded and his white fingertips slowly tapping his arms. When the door opened, he lazily turned his head and looked at her, his dark eyes lighting up. After a long while, he sighed. Bessy raised an eyebrow and opened the door to let him in. What's wrong?
Can you?
Michael knew that she never paid attention to the things on the internet. At most, she played games. She had registered on Twitter and then never posted a single tweet for a year. Drying her hair with a towel, Bessy stared at him sideways, motioning for him to continue. Instead of coming in, Michael continued leaning on the doorframe, his figure long and slender. He looked at her and unhurriedly said,
"Can you cover your tracks better?"
Bessy paused. She threw her towel aside and picked up her phone from the table. Kara had called her 5 times. Kai had called her 3 times. Mary had called her 10 times. Samuel had called her 20 times. She pursed her lips. Beside her, Michael opened the Twitter post to show her the netizens' speculations. Bessy was speechless. Blankly pulling out a chair, she turned on her computer, opened the editor, and typed a string of codes. She tapped away on the keyboard irritably. Michael picked up the towel and looked at her, his head aching. At this moment, deleting the hot searches and Twitter was practically useless. They already knew what they needed to know. Especially, deleting them would only make the doubtful people believe it without hesitation. It was exactly like someone was covering it up. Just that. Looking at Bessy's cold and irritable face, Michael just coughed and said nothing. 5 minutes later, all the netizens watching the show refreshed the page and saw that the Twitter post was deleted. All the posts about BM and BM on Twitter had disappeared into thin air. Clicking on the Twitter homepage again, the BM post had suddenly disappeared from the top of the hot search. Noah's post, which had dropped to 2nd place, was pushed up once again. Netizens couldn't find the BM account anymore. About 20 minutes later, among the BM hot searches, there was a Twitter post from a user called MC. Tisk, she's angry. Someone had secretly kept the screenshots and done a comparison proving how the exposed friendly list with all supreme levels on 24-Hour Idol indeed had MC ranked first with an arrogant supreme level and 20 stars. They replied to the comments one after another.
"Quietly, I got it. Shh, I understand."
Because all the posts about BM on Twitter had disappeared, the production crew, the manager, and the netizens and fans watching the show felt a heartfelt admiration for BM. After being hacked outright and having the hot search deleted, Twitter didn't dare to say a word. The next day at 10 a.m., Bessy went to take the book to Tucker. She drove by herself today. She had made Michael stay at home, and Marvin didn't dare to drive her. James opened the door.
"Bessy, aren't you going to stay for lunch today?"
James looked at the time.
"It's almost lunchtime."
She hadn't planned on eating here. Pulling off her scarf coldly, she politely said to him, "Okay." James had only casually asked and was stunned for a second or two after hearing her answer. He returned to the kitchen in surprise and started whipping up lunch for her. With the heater turned on in the house, Bessy took off her coat before directly walking to Tucker's room. Tucker was sitting in front of the computer playing games with friends from school. Seeing her come in, he sped up and finished the fight, then politely bid farewell to his classmates. Only then did he turn back in surprise. His beautiful eyes lit up.
Bessy.
Bessy casually nodded and then threw the black book in her hand onto his desk. "The upgraded book," she said. She drug out a chair and sat down, speaking concisely. Tucker reached out and flipped through it. He originally just wanted to look at it casually, but he couldn't stop after reading the first page. He immediately sat on the bed with the book in his hands. Outside, James called Zeke again and asked if he wanted to come for lunch. Zeke had a commercial shoot today and didn't really have the time. But he lowered his eyes when he heard Bessy was there and thought for a moment before agreeing.
"Your niece went to visit Tucker?"
The manager drove him to the Park Place apartments, feeling a little excited. Sitting in the back seat, Zeke leaned back tiredly, his eyes half closed, his eyelashes casting a light shadow underneath them. Upon hearing this, his eyelashes trembled and he casually nodded. The manager glanced at the rearview mirror. Zeke seemed to be asleep, so he reached out to turn off the music and not disturb him. 20 minutes later, at nearly noon, they arrived at James's house. Episode 351. Online Turnover. James came out happily with a spatula and asked if they had any dishes they wanted to eat. After getting their answers, he happily returned to the kitchen. Zeke sat on the sofa in silence. The manager glanced around and didn't see Bessy anywhere, so he guessed that she was in Tucker's room. He reached out to push his glasses up and regretfully sat down on the sofa. Lowering his head, he clicked onto Twitter, trying to suppress his excitement.
"Zeke, did your niece angrily delete all the posts on Twitter last night?"
She was really heavy-handed. It was so terrifying that the Twitter officials didn't even dare to push BM's identity post. If it weren't for the screenshots secretly kept on the phones of some of the netizens, and if not for the evidence captured in 24-hour Idol, everyone would almost believe it was a dream. Pursing his lips, Zeke poured himself a glass of water and lowered his eyes, still indifferent and silent. The manager leaned on the sofa and continued scrolling through Twitter. He tried to search for news of BM, but to no avail. He started to exit Twitter regretfully. At this moment, he saw a message just posted by a netizen.
"Ever since last night, why hasn't anyone paid attention to the Evanston Violin Association? I wonder if they're still very powerful in maintaining contact with the Austria Association and have yet to fall."
The manager didn't know much about the Evanston Violin Association, but had seen it being mentioned in the live comments yesterday. Ava belonged to the Evanston Violin Association. She seemed pretty impressive. The manager casually clicked on the Twitter post. Most of the netizens on Twitter were rewatching the show, and hundreds of replies were already posted. "This account is evidently a kindred spirit. I recognized it when I watched the live broadcast last night. I thought I could see the hot search after watching the broadcast, but I didn't expect to not find it after waiting all night.
I learned from both sides that everyone had focused only on Team OST last night and didn't make any waves about the Evanston Violin Association."
"Wow, you still dare to mention it? Your account will be gone."
"Haha, you're giving me a warning."
"It feels like the show had a big impact. I'll take the liberty to guess. Was the show yesterday still 8-Hour Idol?" "Evanston Association? I know that Ava is a member there. P.S. It's the Evanston Violin Association."
"Oh, the Violin Association. I thought it was a powerful organization. Aren't there many such organizations?"
"Hey, do you know why out of so many organizations in Evanston, only the Violin Association dares to use the term Evanston Association? Go and search online before you talk." The manager was a wily old fox in the entertainment industry and knew that all the families in Evanston were quite afraid of the Evanston Violin Association. Seeing this, he returned to the web and searched for it. The Evanston Violin Association entry on the online encyclopedia introduced the establishment time and specific location of the Evanston Violin Association. The manager looked at the entry and didn't find anything useful. He returned to Twitter. Now the replies to the posts were in the thousands. They were still discussing the Evanston Violin Association, and the top hot comment had changed to a popular analytic comment. The manager seriously read the comment. "You won't be able to find it online, but I can divulge that the Evanston Violin Association is our first organization to enter Austria. Even the 4 major families couldn't achieve this. The main credit goes to Mr. Grint, but one of the 4 major families has opened a market in Austria through him. As for the 4 major families, please don't check it. By the way, let me take at Mr. Grint, the Austria Association's special lecturer, the first violinist to have a special performance at the Austria's Royal Concert Hall." Common people didn't know much about this kind of thing, and their curiosity was immediately aroused when they saw this. People in other places didn't know, but those who had stayed in Evanston a long time, especially the students on the fringes of Northwestern University, all knew about the 4 major families. Most people didn't know, but the manager knew of the 4 major families because of the Miller family. Naturally, this account must be a person in that circle.
"Zeke, look at this."
He showed the comment to Zeke in shock.
"Evanston Violin Association has entered the Austria Association."
Holding a cup of tea, Zeke paused upon seeing this and looked down at the comment. His plain eyes were slightly squinted in surprise. The Violin Association's audience wasn't as wide as the entertainment industry. Unless they were interested in the violin or someone around them learned the violin, most people wouldn't pay attention or be nosy about it. Most of the time, Zeke didn't rush to make announcements or cultivate forces to guard against the 4th son. He really didn't know about the Evanston Violin Association. Zeke thought for a while, tapping the cup with his white fingertips.
"It should be the White family."
He remembered that some of the White family members had always liked the violin. They must have been able to step into Austria before other families because of the Evanston Violin Association. Zeke looked away. The current Miller family was in a precarious position. Forget entering Austria. It was a question if they could even remain stable. The manager took back the phone and swiped again. He found that the analytic comment on the 4 major families was gone, but the original Twitter account shot to fame. What a horrifying thought process. "I still have screenshots. Message me if you need it." The manager scrolled through the comments and looked at Zeke in shock.
"Ava is actually a member of the Evanston Violin Association. I really couldn't tell. I thought she was just an unpopular star."
Why was a member of the Evanston Violin Association so miserable in the entertainment industry? Ava wasn't actually an extra. No wonder the director said that there would be surprises in the 2nd episode. If it weren't for the poker tournament, the Evanston Violin Association incident would have been very popular. It had only been suppressed because far more people played games than knew about the Evanston Violin Association. The game incident had gone out of control the moment it exploded. The Evanston Violin Association, in contrast, involved various forces, and it had taken a while to dig out the information. It was a terrifying thought, like the comment that had just been deleted. The manager opened the hot search and took a look. Ava in the Evanston Violin Association had already reached the 5th hot search. He put down his phone and decided to look in an hour when the netizens had dug more things out. James brought out a pile of vegetables and shouted to them,
"Clean up and come eat."
Then he took a rag and walked to Tucker's door. After knocking twice, he went back to the kitchen to serve food without waiting for a response. The manager helped James serve the food. Bessy and Tucker came out of the room. Tucker was frowning, as if deep in thought. The manager came out with the dishes and paused when he saw Bessy slowly walking out. Although the posts last night had been deleted overnight, which had caused the hot search to lag for 2 hours, most people already knew what they'd said. Almost everyone knew it very well. Especially Bessy. The manager knew she majored in computer science, but didn't expect her to have been able to write her own program 4 years ago. She was indeed from the Miller family's bloodline. Thinking of this, he turned to look at Zeke, who was slowly setting the table with the same expression and attitude as always. The manager remained silent. If it hadn't been for the rapid breaking sound last night, he would have sincerely admired Zeke for being so calm.
"How are the dishes today?"
James originally wanted to drink with the manager, but because he had to drive to rush for a commercial later, he could only regretfully put down the extra glass of wine. Zeke nodded, thought for a while and said,
It tastes good, not inferior to the hotel food.
Upon hearing such high praise, James happily brought out the wine and poured himself a glass. Zeke glanced at Bessy. She was sitting next to Tucker, with one hand poking her fork into a piece of meat, and the other hand casually resting on the table, her emotions unclear. He looked away. After finishing his meal, Tucker immediately went back to his room to read his book while the others helped James clean up the table.
It's okay.
James immediately stopped them when they wanted to enter the kitchen.
You guys will only mess up my kitchen.
His seasonings, plates, and tableware were arranged in an orderly manner. Even if he had just finished cooking, the kitchen things were all arranged in order. Bessy put down the bowl on the chopping board. Zeke followed her lead and put the dishes on the chopping board. The manager also put the rag on the chopping board. The three silently walked out of the kitchen. In the kitchen, James muttered,
Michael is more useful.
Zeke had to rush to the commercial now that lunch was done. He gently bid farewell to Bessy and went out with his bucket-shaped down jacket, looking as indifferent as always. Bessy just stood there after sending them off. Zeke walked to the elevator, but the manager didn't follow. Zeke turned around, pulling the zipper of his down jacket, and looked at him. The manager thought for a moment and walked back.
Bessy, can I ask you something?
Bessy leaned against the doorframe. Go on.
Okay.
The manager coughed and pretended to casually ask,
Are you really an original member of Team OST?
The internet had fallen into an uproar, and all the posts on this matter had been deleted. But officially, neither Toby nor the World Poker Tour made a sound. A few steps away, Zeke's fingertips paused on the elevator button. Bessy lazily smiled and glanced at the manager. Yeah. The manager originally thought that she wouldn't admit it after deleting the posts so quickly last night, and had even prepared evidence with the screenshots, the BM Twitter account, and the video of last year's competition in Devil City. But Bessy had generously admitted it before he could take them out. He was rooted to the ground. Episode 352. Do you mean Mr. Grint? Bessy checked the time on her phone and reminded him, Don't you guys have a commercial to rush to? Ding! The elevator door opened. Oh, the manager finally reacted and followed Zeke into the elevator. He returned to his senses and quietly stared at Zeke.
Zeke, did you hear that? She just admitted it.
Staring at the slowly changing floors on the elevator, Zeke was speechless. Hearing it directly from Bessy was much more impactful than seeing it on the internet. After lunch, Bessy got ready to go back to study the subject given to her by Principal White. As soon as she entered Tucker's room, James's voice rang out as he greeted Ricky. Ricky knocked on the door and saw Bessy standing inside. Zeke had introduced him to her before. He very politely greeted her. Putting the computer he brought onto the desk, he didn't immediately start teaching Tucker because of Bessy's presence. Bessy knew that Ricky was here to teach Tucker the basics. She stood up and took her phone. I'm going now. I might be busy with research for a while, she continued before closing the door. Come to me if you encounter any problem.
Thank you, Miss Miller.
Ricky politely nodded, not really planning to find her for any problem. He relaxed when she left. Tucker was closing a black book. Ricky asked,
What are you reading?
Ricky turned on his computer at the table and looked sideways at him. Tucker put down the book, paused for 2 seconds, and lowered his eyes.
My sister gave it to me.
Miss Miller? Ricky raised an eyebrow and nodded. He was anxious to talk to him about other things and didn't really care about the book. Opening a software program on the computer, he warmly looked at Tucker and said in a much gentler voice,
Zeke told me that you're willing to take over the Miller family's mess. He'll set off to Austria in a few days to find you a new teacher. The program isn't the same as your control code intrusion and requires various data, algorithms, and certain functions. I'll give you the basic knowledge over the next 2 days.
In the past 2 days, Ricky had realized an important shortcoming of Tucker. His computer technology was on the offensive side, so all the programs he wrote were to overcome vulnerabilities in various systems. He wasn't much like a programmer. He was more like a hacker. Hackers weren't the same as programmers. A programmer was responsible for the development and design, building system programs and developing software, while a hacker, they weren't subject to rules at all. He could crack a complete program, add various loopholes, do various cracking functions, and overcome all aspects of the system. Tucker sat across from him and listened carefully. In the evening, Jack returned from the company to watch Tucker's progress with Ricky, his eyes full of worry. Ricky put away the computer and looked at Jack.
Is there something wrong with the project?
This project had been snatched from the fourth son's hands. Although the content had already been completely cracked, Jack only had 3 programmers, including Ricky, and it was too difficult to complete the project in a short period.
He definitely won't give up on this project.
Jack shook his head and walked over with sharp eyes.
I'm just worried that he might discover something here.
During this period, Ricky had frequently come over to James's apartment, and it was impossible for the fourth son not to harbor suspicions. Ricky's expression changed, and he pursed his lips.
I won't come tomorrow.
Jack nodded and sighed. It could only come to this. He took out his phone to call Zeke, hoping that he could speed up the progress. Zeke went to the dressing room to change into his normal clothes after taking his promotional pictures.
Zeke, you have a call.
The assistant waiting for him outside immediately handed him his phone.
It's from Jack.
Zeke answered the phone while putting on his coat. Jack asked him about Tucker's teacher.
What time's the flight for the day after tomorrow?
Zeke sat in the back seat, pulling off the scarf around his neck and massaging his eyebrows. The manager looked down at his phone and scanned the hot searches.
10:40 a.m.
Zeke had accepted a movie offer in Austria last month. It wasn't a simple feat for domestic actors to receive an offer from Austria, a place where people from all over the world gathered. Zeke was considered a top actor in America, with good acting skills and a wide range of dramas, even able to book an Austrian movie. It was difficult to enter Austria, and movement inside was restricted as well, especially when crossing the border. They had to work with the crew for a special guide and stamped documents. Zeke only knew a few people in Austria. If he wanted to find a teacher for Tucker in such a short time, it was difficult.
Why is the news about Ava's connection to the Evanston Violin Association so slow today?
The manager sat in his seat and scrolled through Twitter for a long time, but after reading the comments, he seemed to find many had been deleted. He could understand that Bessy had deleted her posts. After all, she could delete it herself. But was deleting Ava's posts necessary too? He clicked on another tweet from an account called Dreamlike Life. I realized that as long as you don't mention a certain someone, the post won't be deleted. So I won't say much about this new actress Ava. Everyone, just look at the pictures. A movie in Austria. Shocked, the manager clicked on the picture and asked Zeke, why would you suddenly want to go to Austria to shoot a movie? Aren't you afraid that in the time you're gone, the fourth son might mess with Tucker and Jack? Zeke's work was usually in the country, so he could guard against the fourth son.
I'm going to find a teacher for Tucker.
Zeke put on his sleep mask with cold fingers. The manager nodded slightly. He was probably finding a programming teacher for Tucker.
But it's so difficult.
The manager turned to the next screenshot, lowered his head and continued reading the gossip.
We have no acquaintances in Austria, and it's difficult to make connections.
Austria's market steadily gathered forces from all over the world and dominated all forces. It was indeed better to find a teacher over there rather than in America. At least the fourth son's reach didn't extend there.
Wait.
The manager stared at the picture and looked up at Zeke.
Zeke, we might have a connection.
Zeke was originally sleepy, but he sat upright upon hearing this. He reached out to remove his sleep mask, revealing his dark eyes.
Do you remember what I told you about the Evanston Violin Association at noon?
The manager asked. Zeke threw his sleep mask aside and nodded.
Evanston Violin Association's Mr. Grint comes in and out of the Austria Association all year round and spends almost half of his time there. He's even a special lecturer of the Austria Association. I think he must be well connected there.
The manager stared at his phone and spoke rigorously.
Of course he has connections, otherwise even the White family wouldn't have gotten connections in the Austria market. Maybe his connections aren't small either,
Zeke lightly said. He was witty, and even the fourth son had to guard against him playing policy schemes. He wouldn't have even been able to escape the fourth son's plot at a young age and also preserve Jack's bloodline if it weren't for his brains. He hadn't paid attention to such things as the Evanston Violin Association previously, and had only thought of competing with the fourth son. But now that his manager mentioned the connection to the Evanston Violin Association, he quickly figured out the key. The manager smiled.
So we might have some connections.
You mean Mr. Grint? Zeke leaned back and smiled.
I don't even know him, and
Zeke shook his head.
Even if I find Mr. Grint, why should he help me after meeting me once?
In this age of complicated humans, how could it be so simple? If the Miller family was still at its peak, Mr. Grint might have done it because of their reputation. But now? Zeke looked out the window and sighed.
We don't, but someone does.
The manager looked at Zeke and showed him a picture.
That Ava is a registered student of Mr. Grint.
Zeke was stunned. The manager continued smiling.
Remember that she's your fan. I'll think about it.
Zeke leaned back in his chair, pursing his lips. He indeed knew Ava, but to ask her about her teacher. At the Highline Apartments, Bessy sat on the sofa with a computer on her lap. She was compiling the data records of her experiments in the Science and Technology Department building for the past half a month. Michael had helped her organize these records previously and had even calculated a few magnetic field current datasets for her. Principal White had asked her to write SCI papers. Although she hadn't agreed, she still kept it in mind. After all, SCI papers were a resource exchange for global staff and held an extremely important position in the academic world. The graduation evaluation of master's and doctorate degrees were based on the impact factor of the published SCI content. The position evaluation and resource allocation requirements of the Research Institute were also based on these SCI papers. Thus, the SCI papers had a decisive influence on the research field. Principal White's project wasn't clear yet, so she just looked into the SCI paper first. The material was the reactor experiment from last time. She had written down the data and process during the experiment and could sort it out in a week. Michael brought in a cup of tea and walked to the back of the sofa instead of sitting down beside her, seeing that she was writing her paper. He half leaned on the sofa and slowly said,
My sister said you're coming to my house next week.
He was talking about the time Rosemary mentioned Joshua's birthday to her. Without looking back, Bessy's hands paused and she simply replied, Yeah. Michael continued drinking tea casually. Seeing her expression, he put down the teacup, then laid down along the back of the sofa and approached her ear. He lowered his eyes and sounded quite surprised.
You really agreed?
Episode 353. The new girl is very cool. Bessy turned her face away and ignored him. But Michael was reluctant to give up and pestered her until she reluctantly let out a, Yeah. Only then did he stand up, still sitting on the back of the sofa, and take out his phone. He clicked on Rosemary's old phone number and transferred her a sum of money. Rosemary received the notification. She sent a, Thank you, God of Wealth, JPEG picture, and sent a question mark. Michael never replied to her. At the same time, Ava had just finished her shoot. Miss Lee handed her a thermos and asked her to take a sip of hot water before following her to the lounge room. The phone in Miss Lee's bag rang a few times and she reached for it while saying, It must be the director from the previous crew coming to find you after... Zeke? Miss Lee saw the name displayed on the phone clearly and her remaining words became stuck in her throat. Beside her, Ava accidentally choked on her water. Her face turned red and she immediately gestured for Miss Lee to pick up the call. Miss Lee had saved Zeke and his manager's phone numbers, but she never thought he would actually call her. After a moment of stunned silence, she quickly picked up, put her hand beside her mouth and lowered her voice. Mr. Miller? Her voice quality was calm and steady. At home, Zeke opened the fridge and took out a bottle of water. He had thought long and hard about this phone call before deciding to call Ava's manager.
Hello, may I ask, does Miss Ava have time to meet tomorrow?
Ava had to work overtime tonight until 10 a.m. tomorrow. This crew had actually been introduced to them by Zeke, and the director was extremely polite to Ava and even arranged her scenes very well. She has time at noon tomorrow. Other staff members were around, so she didn't dare to call him by his name. What's the matter? Twisting off the bottle cap, Zeke took a sip and continued.
I have something to ask her. Is it convenient to meet?
Before Miss Lee even spoke, Ava stared at her and frantically nodded. Yes, it's convenient, very convenient. Miss Lee glared at her but spoke very seriously and respectfully to Zeke. Zeke leaned on the sofa and said gently,
Okay, I'll ask my manager to send you the confirmed address tomorrow.
The two hung up. Ava grabbed Miss Lee's arm. Miss Lee, quickly ask me, quickly. Miss Lee was stunned. Ask what? Ava folded her arms. 3 questions. Miss Lee was speechless. She was silent for a moment. Have you been selected as the female lead by a big director yet? Ava lifted her chin. Of course. Miss Lee was a little tired. Have you shot a movie with Zeke Miller yet? Ava squinted. We recorded a show together. Miss Lee was expressionless. Do you have 10 million followers yet? Ava smiled. 9,900,000. The next day was Monday. Bessy got up very early. Marvin was coming up the stairs next to the money tree with a small shovel. Because she had gotten up earlier than usual, Michael had yet to come back from his run. She went to the table to get a bottle of milk, put a straw in it, and drank it while leaning on the table and looking at Marvin. After a long while, seeing Marvin's back became a little boring, so she looked away. Marvin, what does Joshua like?
Joshua?
He put the shovel in the flower pot and thought about it seriously. Her head aching, she sat down and asked very clearly, Just, what kind of gift would Rosemary give him on his birthday?
Landscaping painting or antiques,
Marvin said after pondering.
Joshua likes such things. Last birthday, Michael specially invited Mr. Soup to write him a congratulatory message on the spot.
Bessy nodded while propping up her chin. After breakfast, she went to school. She took her computer and went to the laboratory with Principal White's project. She arrived at 7 a.m. and Mr. Rostron and the others were already there. There was an empty space in the outermost area. Putting down her computer, she went to the shelf behind her to get a book on reactors. She dragged her chair over and sat down. After reading the information for a while, she flipped to the next paper. Elijah came over to pick up some documents and smiled at her.
Bessy.
Elijah? She looked up and politely greeted him.
You're also writing a paper?
He glanced at the computer screen and saw the structure diagram and detailed text, but didn't scrutinize it out of respect. Bessy looked away, opened the drawing again, and redrew it. Yeah, Elijah reminded her.
You can use the experimental equipment outside the laboratory. It's the best to use when you write the SCI papers.
Thank you. He was kind, so she thanked him sincerely. Elijah waved his hand and walked back into the lab to pass the equipment to Mr. Rostron. Mr. Rostron observed the reaction and said in a low voice,
We're going to see the underground nuclear reactor at 9 a.m. I applied for it last week.
Elijah and Sarah were stunned for a moment and very surprised. Sarah immediately headed out. I'll make the preparations. An amazing early reactor laid under the ground of Northwestern University's laboratory. It was rumored to have been left behind by an old researcher, and only people in the Research Institute knew about it. But not everyone could see this reactor. If they wanted to go down, they had to be at least a second-level researcher, or they could go in and see it after making great contributions to the laboratory and the Research Institute. Sarah and Elijah wouldn't necessarily have such an opportunity even in 10 years of work on their own. This was the importance of having a good teacher. Although Mr. Rostron hadn't accepted them as students, the researchers in the general laboratories would take the students under their wings and wouldn't be too harsh. Going to the underground nuclear reactor required special protective clothing, so Sarah went to the ground floor to get them. It took time to make the request and get the suits back, so she went quickly. When the staff member there heard Mr. Rostron's name, he hurriedly prepared 3 sets of protective suits. It was still almost an hour before he returned and handed them to Sarah. She took them and returned to the underground floor. It was almost time, so Mr. Rostron and Elijah both changed their clothes. Mr. Rostron had already gone out. Wearing his hat and looking at the changing room, Elijah opened the door and asked Sarah,
Bessy isn't going?
Stunned, Sarah said, They only gave me 3 sets.
I'll ask Mr. Rostron.
Elijah directly walked out. Forget it. Sarah lowered her voice and looked at him. It's almost time to see the reactor, so don't worry about it. It's a waste of time. She doesn't need to go anyway. Mr. Rostron had only applied for 2 hours of time. Going up to apply for another set of special protective clothing and coming back would take an hour. Sarah didn't want to waste this time. Seeing Elijah walk out silently, Sarah frowned and followed. Upon hearing Elijah's question, Mr. Rostron was also shocked.
I forgot.
He held his gold-rimmed glasses in his hands. Bessy hadn't come to the laboratory for several days, but today she was sitting at the computer desk in the corner. The whole laboratory was 22 feet wide and 80 feet long. Even the outer layer was dozens of square meters and was full of experiment tables. Sitting next to the computer in the corner, Bessy really had no presence. Sarah came out in protective clothing. She walked forward with her tall figure. "Mr. Rostron, Bessy is new and can't do anything even if she goes to see the reactor." She checked the time. It was almost 9 a.m. Mr. Rostron didn't leave and just turned to Elijah, saying in a calm voice and a serious expression,
"Ask her to apply for special protective clothing on the first floor."
Elijah went to inform Bessy. She had already put down her thesis and was standing on the experimental platform, rebuilding her last reactor. Upon hearing him, she slightly looked up, her eyes extremely cold, and her words concise. "No need, you guys can go." She was always serious doing her experiments. Her slender fingers adjusted the current to control the magnetic field at this time. Her series of actions were methodical. Every action seemed very confident and not in the least bit sloppy. She was obviously doing an experiment, but Elijah felt like she was unhurriedly crafting something by hand. He stared at her in shock for a while.
"This opportunity is very rare. If you don't go, you won't necessarily find such an opportunity again in the next 10 years.
He went back to tell Mr. Rostron that she wasn't going. "She's not coming?" Sarah looked at the laboratory in shock. Elijah looked away with a complicated expression.
"She's doing an experiment." "Let's go."
Mr. Rostron just lightly looked away. He had only asked Elijah to find her out of feeling apologetic for missing her out. This time, he mainly wanted to bring Elijah and Sarah. The two of them hadn't been dismissed by him after helping out for so long, because they had a very strong hands-on ability. They had followed him to research the reactor in their 2 years in the Research Institute. He had brought them here to hear their thoughts on the reactor. Would it open up a new idea for their research? So he wasn't bothered that Bessy had rejected the opportunity. He didn't care if she came or not. Bessy completed a whole set of experiments. She looked down at the energy recording instrument, which had reached the maximum value she had estimated. Relaxing, she neatly put away the equipment and returned to write on her computer. At 11:30 a.m., Mr. Rostron and the others returned from the underground reactor. Elijah and Sarah had received a lot of inspiration and immediately took out their computers to record their breakthrough ideas. Mr. Rostron continued doing experiments. After completely analyzing the content of the experiment at this stage and then writing it down, Bessy picked up her phone and glanced at the display. Kara had called her 10 minutes ago. She swiped the screen to unlock it. Inside the laboratory, she didn't pick up her phone because she remembered Elijah and Sarah telling her that Mr. Rostron liked to be quiet. She directly opened Twitter and clicked on Kara's profile. Then, she sent a single question mark in a message. Episode 354, Mr. Grint's Unconventional Student. Kara seemed to be waiting for her reply and replied very quickly. "You didn't come to class in the afternoon? I didn't see you in the nuclear engineering class." She had even gone to the nuclear engineering class to wait for her. Bessy slowly replied to her. "I'm in the laboratory." Kara responded quickly. "Let's all have lunch together at 12:30 p.m. at the cafeteria close to you on the 3rd floor. After a while, Bessy agreed. She put her phone on the table and couldn't help but rub her temples. She realized that Kara must be referring to Gary and Kai by all. She stared at her phone for a long while before continuing drawing. Recalling the reactor experiment she had just done, she drew another drawing. At 12:10 p.m., she put the computer back into her black backpack, gently pushed in her chair, and went straight out. As soon as Elijah finished writing down his inspiration, he looked up from his computer and saw Bessy leaving through the glass window. In the experiment room, Mr. Rostron poured a glass of water and passed by the bench. He narrowed his eyes at the data on the instrument and asked,
"You guys did experiments here?"
He tilted his head and looked at Sarah. Sarah lifted her head and glanced at the test bench he was referring to, then shook her head. "Elijah and I always do experiments in the middle area." Mr. Rostron took a sip of water and lightly nodded. He stood there, deep in thought, and then glanced at Bessy's computer desk. At 12:30 p.m., Bessy went to meet Kara and the others. At the same time, Zeke and his manager arrived at a private restaurant in Evanston. Zeke hung up his bucket-shaped down jacket and sat down. The manager took the tea on the table and poured himself and Zeke each a cup. Instead of immediately ordering food, he waited for Miss Lee and Ava to arrive first.
I thought you wouldn't reach out to Ava.
He held the teacup and smiled at Zeke. Leaning on the back of the chair and tapping on the table with his slender fingertips, Zeke stared into space and didn't reply to him. If it had been in the past, he wouldn't have asked her. But now, thinking of what Jack said to him last night, he narrowed his eyes. As they were talking, the manager's phone rang with a call from Miss Lee. He immediately stood up and opened the door. Ava and Miss Lee had just arrived.
Come in quickly.
This private restaurant was very private, so the manager wasn't afraid of paparazzi and only closed the door after they entered. Mr. Miller. Miss Lee and Ava respectfully greeted him. Zeke got up. His usual indifferent expression softened with politeness.
Please sit.
He handed them the menu. Ava rejected it. Mr. Miller, we'll eat whatever you order. These two revered him and didn't want to order anything at all. Zeke didn't force them and handed the menu to his manager instead. After inquiring about their tastes, he ordered a few dishes. While the dishes were served, Zeke pursed his lips.
The reason why I'm looking for Miss Hutchinson.
No, Mr. Miller, just call me Ava. Ava was caught between laughter and tears. If Bessy knew that you were calling me Miss Hutchinson. Zeke's expression slightly softened at the mention of Bessy. He pondered for a while and then asked,
You're a registered student of Mr. Grint.
Yes. Ava picked up her fork and nodded. Zeke seemed a little relieved as he took a sip of tea.
How's your relationship with your teacher?
You mean Mr. Grint? Ava picked up the fork and coughed awkwardly. Besides him criticizing my talent, our relationship is not bad. Of Mr. Grint's 3 apprentices, she was the worst. Ava never revealed that she was Mr. Grint's apprentice because compared to the other 2, how could she dare to? Although she said it was not bad, her expression couldn't lie and revealed that it was a good relationship. Zeke fell into a moment of silence. Ava looked up and inquired, Do you have something more to ask about my teacher? Putting down his teacup, Zeke hesitated.
I asked to see you because there's something I need your help with.
Ava immediately put down her fork and excitedly said, Tell me, as long as I can help a little bit, I will go through mountains of daggers and seas of flames for you. Bessy and Zeke had helped her so much. She had even escaped from falling into oblivion. Before this, she couldn't find any chances to repay her debt. After all, they were all like big bosses. Ava felt like other than serving and pouring tea for them, she might not find any chance to repay them in this life. Now, after hearing that Zeke needed her help, how could she remain calm? Sitting next to her, the manager glanced at her expression and laughed involuntarily.
It's not as serious as going through mountains of daggers and seas of flames. Zeke just wanted you to help introduce him to Mr. Grint. Is that okay?
Ava's excited expression condensed a little. After about a few seconds, she sat down again. The manager originally thought that she would agree right away and didn't expect her to have such an expression. Stunned, he quickly added,
If it's not convenient, then it's all...
Oh, no. Ava looked up. It's not that. I was just wondering. Why did you ask me for help? Ava had originally thought that this time she could finally have had a chance to show her gratitude now that Zeke had come to her. But who knew? He was actually asking about Mr. Grint. She picked up the glass of water and silently took a sip. In the end, she was destined to be useless. The manager noticed her strange expression and glanced at Zeke, who also paused. He looked up at her and then lowered his eyes to take a sip of tea.
Can't I ask you for help?
Ava's tone didn't seem to be of refusal, but her expression confused him. Wait a moment. Putting down the teacup, she took out her phone, unlocked the screen, and clicked on Bessy's phone number. Bessy picked up within one ring. Ava turned on the speaker. Bessy? She asked. Hearing this, Zeke was stunned. He was shocked that she had called Bessy. In fact, he hadn't told Bessy about this because he didn't want her to think that he only had recognized her as his niece to make use of her abilities and connections. He was always confident, but regarding Bessy and Tucker, he was overly cautious. He didn't expect Ava to directly call Bessy. On the other end, Bessy calmly said, Go on. Zeke is with me. He asked to meet me today. Ava propped her chin on her hand and let her curly hair fall around her. In the cafeteria, Bessy raised a hand to get Kara and Kai to quiet down. The originally noisy Kara immediately zipped her mouth shut, sat down on the chair, and stared at her. Bessy frowned. "What's the matter?" Ava laughed. "He asked me to contact our teacher." They only shared one teacher, Mr. Grint, so Bessy immediately knew who Zeke was looking for. Poking a straw into one of the Cokes brought over by Gary, she paused for a moment. "Tell him to come to my school. I'll wait for him at the gates." They hung up. Zeke massaged his eyebrows with such force his slender fingers turned pale. He didn't expect Bessy's friend to be as swift and unforeseen as her.
"I didn't want Bessy to know."
"Zeke, she had to know about this." Ava shook her head. "The internet has already dug out that I'm Mr. Grint's unconventional student." Ava's words were a little self-deprecating. Taken aback, the manager sternly asked,
"Mr. Grint is a specially invited lecturer for the Austria Association. Based on this alone, you're already out of the ordinary by being a registered student."
"But Mr. Grint only forcibly accepted me because he was overjoyed at Bessy's good results." Ava quietly looked at him. Because of Bessy's results? What did she mean? Zeke and the manager now seemed to have more information which they couldn't understand. Or perhaps the idea was too incredulous. Ava continued speaking blankly. After Bessy entered college, she stopped coming to the Violin Association and didn't take any more exams or attend practice. I think she might have forgotten that she's Mr. Grint's head student. In the canteen on the third floor of Northwestern University, Bessy hung up and calculated the time Zeke would take to arrive. She estimated it would be after 1:20 p.m. She leaned back in her chair and drank her Coke. Kara, Gary, and Kai all stared motionlessly at her. After a long while, Gary, who had more self-control out of the three, took the lead to ask,
"The high-level poker tournament player your high school friends were talking about was you, right?"
Bessy crossed her legs and nodded. They already expected this and weren't surprised at her reply, but Kai was still in disbelief.
"So you're the legendary teammate of Sun God Online? The female player with the hand speed of 1000 in Team OST?"
Bessy put down her Coke, picked up her fork, and rubbed her temples. "You believed I had a hand speed of 1000? Kai let out a sigh of relief and finally stopped looking at Bessy as if she was a weirdo.
"Sun God's hand speed is only 600.
Normal professional players had a hand speed of 300 to 400, so 600 was already considered God level. Not many hands could reach a speed of 600 among the poker tournament's professional players. As for 1000, it was almost twice as much as 600. It was too terrifying a thought. As for Kai, his hand speed of 100 was already considered not bad among ordinary people.
"Then what's your hand speed?"
Gary also started eating. He maintained his composure, the best out of the three. Bessy ate a piece of the ribs that Gary and the others had brought. Upon hearing this, she said in a relaxed tone without looking up, "When I competed with Toby 4 years ago, it was 730. She had trained her hand speed from being a hacker. When she was 9, Bertha's old computer had been unable to keep up with her hand speed. Often, she could type a string of codes, and the old computer would take about 2 minutes to display it. Thus, she had gone down to using Mr. Cheatham's computer. Within a few days, he had given her a pile of documents and a book to help her make her own computer after reading them. Kai was drinking Coke, and he successfully choked on it after hearing this. He looked at her, gaping, and managed to spit out after a long while, "Crazy." Episode 355, The ICNE. Kara simply couldn't understand the world of hand speeds and just sat quietly sipping Coke as they talked. Bessy's phone rang. It was Dean Soup. She picked up. At home, Dean Soup was flush with success and smiling from ear to ear.
"There's a competition called ICNE in May next year. I've sent you the details. Take a look."
They exchanged a few more words before hanging up. Bessy put down her phone and glanced at the others. "Do you know what the ICNE is?" Kai shook his head while Gary squinted slightly. "I do." Kara looked up. "It's an international high-tech innovation competition, one of the highest-level competitions in the science world. It's jointly organized by the world's top 10 universities and 3 major scientific research institutes. Registration began in May this year. I think last month there were 100 teams in the subcompartment area. And the University of Chicago also had some graduate student teams selected to participate in the international finals in February of next year." Kara was from the student union's office and had taken part in representing Northwestern University as well. But unfortunately, their team hadn't been selected. At that time, she had compiled Northwestern University's data and had taken a look because it involved her major. But why did you mention it so suddenly? Speaking of this, Kara suddenly remembered something. Did Dean Soup tell you to participate in the training camp and division selection in May next year? A new student that dares to sign up for this. Bessy, you're indeed the top scorer. The other two remained silent and stared speechlessly at her. The competition was only for graduate students or laboratory members who had earned certain achievements in the professional field. In May this year, 2 teams from Northwestern University, consisting of graduate students from the Science and Technology Department, had taken part, and a total of 10 people had lost to the University of Chicago. Kara, Kai, and Gary felt that if Dean Soup had enrolled her for May of next year, well, compared to Bessy's other activities, this could probably be considered normal. Bessy appeared calm and continued eating while checking her email. She hadn't understood what the ICNE was just now, but after flipping through the documents Dean Soup sent, and hearing Kara's explanation, she finally knew what kind of competition it was. She clicked on Dean Soup's profile and messaged him to reject it. Dean Soup replied quickly,
Why won't you participate?
Dean Soup wanted her to sign up for this particularly high-level competition next year to build up her reputation. He and the professors of the Science and Technology Department all thought she was strong enough to participate in the competition for research, and he had planned to register her for May next year. With her current popularity in Northwestern University, Dean Soup and the Science and Technology Department were very concerned about her growth, especially since, unlike Luke, she didn't have her own teacher who could arrange everything for her. Thus, they were particularly concerned about her and had planned the next things for her. But they didn't know that Principal White also had plans for her. Bessy remembered the research project given to her a few days ago by Principal White. He had arranged it for her a few days ago, though he didn't say anything further and only asked her to carefully read it. Today, looking at the specific content of the ICNE sent by Dean Soup, Bessy managed to guess what it was for. Principal White probably had a place for her in the ICNE finals in February next year. Bessy looked back at her phone and replied to Dean Soup, I should be participating in the finals in February next year. Principal White had already given her a goal long ago and was planning to hold a succession ceremony in March of next year. Before that, the most direct way for her to enter the research institute was through her achievements. Only high-level research results could convince the public. Bessy was only turning 20 years old this year. The ICNE was an important international cooperation project and was the best route that Principal White had found for her because of the various options it offered. Registration for this project started in May of this year. It seemed like back in May, Principal White had gotten his hands on a place for the finals in order to pave the way for Bessy. He had been very thoughtful for his heir. Dean Soup didn't reply to her message for a long time. At Dean Soup's home, Dr. Weatherby, sitting across from him drinking tea, unhurriedly said,
Bessy didn't participate in the laboratory's special training, so the research professors who are devoted to the Research Institute don't know about her. Once she participates in the ICNE competition in May of next year, many teachers will rush to accept her as an apprentice.
Other than a small number of small-minded people, most people engaged in research also hoped that their students could do useful research. Dr. Weatherby finished speaking and discovered that Dean Soup was silently staring at his phone in a daze. He took a sip of tea and then said,
Dean Soup? Oh.
Returning to his senses, Dean Soup turned off his phone and then turned it on again to take another look.
Are you okay?
Dr. Weatherby asked in concern. Dean Soup shook his head and hesitantly said,
I just got a message from Bessy. What did she say?
Dr. Weatherby thought of her confusing decisions and sat upright.
Did she say she wants to withdraw? No.
Dean Soup glanced at his phone again to confirm that he hadn't seen it wrongly and continued.
She seems to be saying that she might be participating in the finals in February of next year.
Then he handed his phone to Dr. Weatherby.
Help me take a look. Did I read it wrong?
Dr. Weatherby looked up dully and was speechless. Back at Northwestern University, a few minutes after that, Bessy received a message. It was just an ellipsis from Dean Soup. She looked at it and replied, Thank you, Dean Soup, before casually putting down her phone. This is a team competition. Kara picked up her fork and curiously asked, "Have you found your teammates for the competition? I know a few seniors." Bessy continued eating and thoughtfully looked at the three of them. This type of team competition normally had 2 to 5 team members. But Principal White hadn't assigned her team members. She thought about it and didn't immediately answer. At 1 p.m., they finished eating. After Gary and Kai finished gossiping and confirmed that the Bessy being talked about online was indeed the Bessy they knew, they returned to their dormitory where a large group of friends was waiting for their latest battle news. Kara looked at Bessy. "Are you going back to the laboratory now?" "No." Bessy shook her head, putting on her hat and putting on her scarf again, wrapping herself up until she was only a pair of eyes. She slowly said, "I'm going out. Someone is waiting for me by the campus gate." "Oh, I'm going in that direction as well." Kara put a hand on her shoulder and laughed. "What a coincidence." The four divided into 2 groups. One group returned to their dormitory while the other headed across the campus. In less than 20 minutes, Kara and Bessy arrived at the gates. It was cold today and was also Monday, so the number of people outside was much fewer than usual. Kara wasn't in a rush and waited with Bessy. "Bessy, who are you waiting for?" Kara pulled up her scarf. Standing on the side of the road and casually looking at the one-way street, Bessy saw a car slowly drive towards them and indifferently said, "My uncle." "Your uncle?" Kara nodded. She felt like something was amiss. She was thinking about it when a big car stopped not far from them. A man wearing a bucket hat and a black mask got down from the back seat. Kara looked over in a dazed manner, pointed at Zeke, and asked Bessy in shock, "Isn't that Zeke Miller?" Behind Zeke, the manager was shocked to see that she could recognize him. Were her eyes superhuman? Since she was Bessy's friend, Zeke very politely greeted her. "Hello." Kara was speechless. Oh, she remembered it now. In 24-Hour Idol, it was revealed that Bessy was Zeke's niece, and he was who Bessy had meant when she said her uncle. Ever since she became roommates with Bessy, she received shock after shock. Zeke was her uncle. She had entered the laboratory and even had 20 stars on the supreme level. After that, it didn't seem particularly shocking for Kara to meet her crush face to face. 5 minutes later, she walked onto the street in a trance and entered a boutique shop. The owner politely asked, "What do you want to order?" She finally returned to her senses. Outside the gate, Bessy got into Zeke's car. She sat in the back seat, pulled off her hat, took out her phone, and directly called Mr. Grint. The phone rang twice and was picked up. "Teacher." She leaned against the window. On the other end of the call, Mr. Grint was in Austria. After Bessy reached the 7th level in the Violin Association, he didn't force her to rise further. It already wasn't easy for ordinary people to study diligently and reach a medium level for music, and it required more talent the further they climbed. Some people found themselves stuck in a bottleneck for decades. "Why are you contacting me all of a sudden?" Mr. Grint waved his hand and asked the people beside him to head out. He stood at the window and smiled. "Have you decided to come to Austria?" "No." Bessy immediately denied this and continued, "My uncle wants to see you." Mr. Grint was holding lectures in Austria this month and hadn't paid attention to domestic news. "Your real uncle?" Bessy glanced at Zeke. "Yeah." "Sure." Mr. Grint answered simply and neatly. Bessy hung up and sent Zeke's contact information to Mr. Grint. Then, she gave Mr. Grint's contact information to the manager. The manager noted it down and glanced at Bessy. That was it? Shouldn't a grandmaster like Mr. Grint be busy every day? Wasn't he either preparing for a concert, giving lessons to people, or practicing the violin? Episode 356. Hot Search Explodes. "You're going to Austria tomorrow?" Bessy glanced at Zeke. She had heard from Ava that he had taken a movie in Austria. He nodded. "Yes, there's a movie there. I'll take half a year to film it." Some of the well-made movies even took a few years to make. Half a year was just the duration of Zeke's personal participation. The movie had a heroic theme and many protagonists, so his part only required half a year. "That's good." Bessy put her hat on again. "My teacher is also in Austria." She grabbed her backpack and got out of the car. She didn't have any experiments to work on that afternoon and, instead of going to the laboratory, headed to the library to perfect her thesis. The manager silently stared at her back as she left. Then he turned his gaze to Zeke, was silent for a moment, and sighed.
Your niece comes and goes like the wind. She really has inherited your dad's style.
At Grace's apartment, the ever-graceful Elise knocked on the door. After a while, Grace opened the door.
Elise, come in.
She immediately let her in. Elise sat at the table and looked at her, smiling more genially than before, and affectionately held her hand. You should have heard about what happened online. The smile on Grace's face stagnated. She hadn't slept well in the past few days and had felt restless, so her expression also looked lethargic. Bessy and Zeke were so popular on the internet. How could she not know? She couldn't have imagined that James, originally a construction worker, would turn out to be Zeke's brother. Her heart had felt numb the moment she saw the news on the internet.
Of course I know.
Grace withdrew her hand, lowered her head, and poured a glass of water for Elise. She felt distinctly bitter. Elise looked at her and knew that she probably hadn't figured out Zeke's identity. Picking up her cup, she suppressed the remorse in her heart. Zeke is actually the heir of the Miller family. You might be unfamiliar with them, and I am too. But Daryl once told me that although the Miller family has fallen, they're still in the middle of the pyramid in Evanston. In terms of its status in Evanston, even 100 Perez families wouldn't match up. Bam! The teacup in Grace's hands fell to the ground. She blankly stared at Elise. No wonder Anne said that James had bought a lot of jewelry for Bessy last time. At the time, she had even maliciously wondered if he had lost touch with reality. The next day, Zeke and his manager were at the airport in Austria at 4:30 p.m. They were following the director and his group. The director leading everyone had blonde hair and blue eyes. He solemnly instructed,
We're at the Austrian borders. The staff has already gone through the border documents. Everyone should know their regulations, so don't randomly walk about. If anything happens, there's nothing I can do.
The others nodded. Austria's landing strip wasn't domestic and was occupied by a few forces. There were no specific rules, and it was easy to get into trouble without following the team. In this chaotic country, even people in the 4 major families must abide by the rules. Holding his suitcase in one hand, Zeke wore a slender and straight overcoat. He wasn't so famous here and could do whatever he wanted without being recognized or having to wear a bucket coat. He took a few steps and saw a young man getting off of a black car on the wide road outside.
Mr. Miller.
The young man came straight to Zeke and politely bowed.
Hello, I'm Henson, Bessy's classmate. Mr. Grint asked me to wait here for you.
Not only Zeke and the manager, but even the director beside them had never seen such a situation before. In Austria, unless it was the forces stationed here or some colleges and special tour groups, nobody dared to drive outside the border at will.
Zeke, you know someone in Austria?
The director was shocked. Others curiously looked at Zeke. Zeke pursed his lips. He said goodbye to the director, arranging to meet him later in Austria's center, and then got into the car with his manager.
Sorry to trouble you.
The manager was in awe of Henson for daring to drive outside of Austria's border. He knew that Mr. Grint was a special lecturer invited by the Austria Association, but he hadn't expected his status in the Austria Association to be so high. Otherwise, how could his student dare to go back and forth at the border? Henson sat up front next to the driver while the manager sat in the back seat. He couldn't help but send Zeke a message.
This Mr. Grint is incredible. No wonder you said that the White family is riding on his coattails. His student even dares go in and out of Austria's border so freely. If only your niece was here with us.
He couldn't help thinking of Bessy. He also felt doubtful at the same time. Ava had said that Bessy was Mr. Grint's chief student, so why didn't she come? 4 hours later at 8 p.m., Henson's car arrived at the Austria Association. They got out of the car and Henson asked Zeke,
Mr. Miller, do you want to see Mr. Grint now, or do you want to take a break and see him tomorrow?
From his tone, Zeke and his manager both got the hint that Mr. Grint was completely following their schedule. Narrowing his eyes, Zeke felt extremely doubtful inside, but his face was rigorous and polite.
Do you know which time would be convenient for Mr. Grint?
Since Mr. Grint had been introduced to him by Bessy, he naturally didn't want to leave a bad impression on him. Seeing the cautious appearance of Zeke and his manager, Henson quickly waved his hands and then laughed.
Mr. Miller, Bessy is our teacher's only head student. He is willing to open this side of himself to her. She didn't want to come to the Austria Association, so he didn't force her and gave me the place instead. We're not standing on formality, so please don't speak to me like this.
Zeke and his manager didn't pay attention to the rest of Henson's words. One sentence kept echoing in their minds. She didn't want to come to the Austria Association, so he didn't force her to and gave me the place instead. This might not be a big deal to the manager, but for Zeke, who knew a great deal more about Austria, it was shocking news. The 4 major families in Evanston were all thinking of how to open up an economic network in Austria and wanted to get into the market at all costs. It was the first time he heard something so arrogant. She didn't even want a place as a student in Austria? The manager exchanged glances with Zeke. Henson guessed at his meaning and politely said,
"You'll probably be very busy, right? My teacher has nothing to do today, so shall I take you to see him now?" "Yes, sorry to trouble you."
Zeke politely nodded. Henson took them to Mr. Grint's office and poured them tea.
"Please don't be so polite with me. My teacher will arrive in 10 minutes. I'll help you arrange for your accommodations in the meantime."
After spending a few minutes with them, he looked at the time on his phone and directly stood up and left the room. The manager held the teacup and blankly stared at Zeke as if he had gone crazy.
"Zeke, your niece."
In America, he had been shocked to hear from Ava that Bessy was Mr. Grint's chief student. But after coming here, personally verifying Mr. Grint's status and his connection to the Austria Association, he knew he had been surprised too early in America. Come to think of it, Zeke would definitely have an easier time finding a teacher for Tucker here. He stiffly took a sip of tea. Back in America, Bessy returned home early instead of going to the laboratory. Rosemary greeted her from the sofa when she arrived. Michael threw a key onto the table and sat down, raising an eyebrow at Rosemary.
"Here to have a free meal?"
Rosemary slightly crossed her legs and ignored him. She glanced at Bessy, who was drinking water.
"Bessy, are you coming to our house on Sunday?"
Bessy leaned on the table and only remembered about the party now. But she hadn't prepared her gift yet. She tapped her fingertips on the table and thought about what gift to prepare. Joshua liked antiques and paintings, but these weren't in her collection. She touched her chin thoughtfully. Jared and Clarissa might have a way. Thinking of this, she politely nodded to Rosemary and went upstairs.
"Our dad said he would eat an extra serving of vegetables at every meal."
Rosemary regretfully stared at Bessy's back and folded her arms.
The family doctor was so shocked he immediately wondered if something was wrong.
Leaning on the back of the sofa and looking away from the staircase, Michael lazily looked at her.
"You came just to tell me that?"
"Of course not." Rosemary sat up in distress.
"Aaron has been in frequent contact with people on the base recently. He has stopped covering up his contact with our 2 rising stars in Evanston space, Instructor Clark and Captain Baldwin, and is brazenly pulling them in, especially Captain Baldwin."
She looked at Michael's expression. His eyes were squinted indifferently. The light in them was faint and scattered. As he gave a gentle,
"Oh."
She narrowed her eyes.
"Never mind other things. You don't even care about the base you single-handedly developed? Why don't you try to win over Captain Baldwin?"
Upon hearing this, Michael finally sat up straight.
"It's best if you can heed my advice."
Rosemary heaved a sigh.
"Captain Baldwin isn't so easy to rein in. I heard Aaron has been going at it for months." "Say."
Michael finally had a lukewarm reaction and turned to Rosemary.
"Have you had a good relationship with Simons recently?"
Michael always said things like this out of nowhere. Rosemary spent about 2 minutes trying to figure it out. Simons was old and talkative and usually forgot things easily. Thus, he recorded things in a small notebook and talked about them from time to time. Michael was cursing her around the corner. Walking over and noticing Rosemary's expression, Marvin couldn't help but ask out of concern,
"Miss, are you okay? Are you having a conflict with Simons? He's old. Don't mind that he's talkative."
Rosemary was speechless. "Shut up, stupid gardener," she thought. Episode 357, Giant Crocodile. Upstairs, Bessy turned on her computer and contacted Clarissa first. Clarissa was still outside at the moment, and her surroundings were quite dark. Antiques and paintings? She put down the camera in her hand and pointed the lens at herself.
You can ask Giant Crocodile.
Tapping her fingers on the table, Bessy was surprised. Giant Crocodile? Didn't he engage in weaponry?
He has a lot of stuff.
Clarissa laughed.
I was a war correspondent who ran on his site for several years, and I once snuck into his private library. He's a collector, so you can find anything in his private library. At home and abroad, past and present, as long as he can obtain it, he'll add it to his private library. He's definitely the world's biggest collector. You can obtain anything you want with one phone call. Giant Crocodile's business was illegal, and there were a few items he valued that couldn't be obtained by him.
Okay, Bessy nodded. I'll think about it. She originally had intended to ask them to help her buy something, but perhaps Giant Crocodile's private library.
Don't just think about it. Giant Crocodile's only hobby is his private library, and he treats it like a treasure,
said Clarissa calmly.
But you're a different matter. As his big brother, with one word from you, he'll immediately open the door to his private library and let you choose all kinds of antiques. Giant Crocodile and Lone Wolf had a fateful friendship, although Lone Wolf had already forgotten about helping him long ago.
After hanging up, Bessy leaned back, deep in thought about Giant Crocodile. Giant Crocodile's private library was his treasure, so she was hesitant. Downstairs, Marvin called her down for dinner, so she temporarily put this matter out of her mind. On the other end of the call, Clarissa hung up and put the camera on her shoulders. She opened the special software on her phone, clicked on Giant Crocodile's profile, and slowly sent a message to add fuel to the fire. It's time for you to repay your big brother. Giant Crocodile was at the border at the moment. He had just finished a job and was watching his subordinates leave from the wooden house they were in. The phone on the table in front of him lit up and he picked it up. Clearly seeing the dialogue box floating on the lock screen, his casual and distracted manner suddenly became serious. Without delay, he took a screenshot and then dialed Clarissa's number.
What trouble did my big brother meet with?
Giant Crocodile asked in a deep voice. His exotic features and eyebrows were stiff, and his expression was solemn. If Clarissa had to contact him, it probably wasn't a small matter. He was prepared to send a truckload of men out to help. His big brother was a hacker and was surely incredibly frail. It's not really considered trouble. Still carrying the camera, Clarissa greeted some people and walked towards the car. Lone Wolf has taken a fancy to your private library. In the middle of assessing his manpower, Giant Crocodile was rendered speechless. After a while, his thick eyebrows knitted together.
Are you sure?
Certain. Lone Wolf needs an antique. Clarissa sat down and gestured for her driver to set off. On the other end of the phone, Giant Crocodile leaned back in his chair for a long time before saying,
How is this repaying my big brother?
How could his life be comparable to an antique? Other than this, what else can you do to repay Lone Wolf? Clarissa mercilessly sneered. Giant Crocodile was speechless. Clarissa put the camera on the seat beside her. I'll give you Lone Wolf's contact number so you can contact your big brother personally. At the Highline Apartments, Bessy was eating downstairs. Bessy, shall I pick you up on Sunday? Rosemary sipped from her glass of wine and chuckled at her. While eating, Bessy looked up at this. Whatever you like. Rosemary took a sip of wine and raised an eyebrow at Michael. He ignored her. Halfway through her meal, Bessy's phone, which was placed next to her bowl, rang. It was an overseas phone number without a name. She glanced at it and paused. Miss Miller, Marvin alerted her from 2 seats away. Your phone. I have to answer this call, she said. She took her phone and calmly went upstairs. Just as the call was about to hang up, she closed the door and picked up. Immediately, a male voice said ineloquently,
Lone Wolf?
Since she was now terribly familiar with Jared and the others, Bessy didn't bother turning on the voice changer and just leaned against the door. Giant Crocodile? Her voice was clear and slow and sounded cold, just like the tone she used to speak online. But he was stunned that it was a female voice. Beep, beep. On the other end of the phone, Giant Crocodile hung up with a click, stood there for 2 minutes, and then called Clarissa for confirmation. Still in the car, Clarissa leaned back and chuckled. "You're through. How dare you hang up on your big brother's call?" Giant Crocodile's face cracked a little, and after a long while, he directly opened the special software and called Lone Wolf via video. He seemed to be waiting for him and picked up within 2 seconds. The person on the other end of the video put the phone on the table, pulled out a chair and sat down. The girl had clear eyes, dark hair draping over her white clothes, and beautiful skin. She looked 10 years younger than him, and she would have been even younger a few years ago. As a senior member of 129, Giant Crocodile had naturally followed other people to expose several top-notch hackers, but none of them matched up to Lone Wolf. With this face, if it weren't for Clarissa's reminder, he wouldn't have recognized her even if she stood in front of him. After a long while, he finally reacted.
"Wait a moment,"
he said, and calmly picked up his phone.
"I'll go to my private library."
Outside the wooden house was a brightly lit forest, where several strangely shaped houses were built. Overhead, the sound of helicopters could be heard. This was the border, an area unaffected by the country's forces. Within a few minutes, Giant Crocodile walked up to a black iron gate. The young man guarding the door stood upright.
"Boss, are you going to the warehouse today?"
Giant Crocodile slightly nodded and scanned his iris for verification. The young man led him inside, and he walked several floors down the staircase to the private library. He turned on the lights and aimed the camera at the private collections. Through the camera, Bessy saw Giant Crocodile's private library. In the outermost area was a glass cabinet with ancient bronzes, swords, armors, and historical weapons from abroad placed inside. In the middle were various diamonds and other jewelry. Further in were manuscripts, pottery, and inkstone antiques of various colors. Anything here would drive those who knew a valuable good outside insane. It was a pity Bessy didn't understand their value. Going all the way to the innermost area, Giant Crocodile showed Bessy everything. His real voice sounded much colder than online as he said,
"Big brother, the antique paintings are all here. Tell me whichever one you like."
Hearing this, the young man who had led the way finally noticed the phone in Giant Crocodile's hands. He seemed to be on a video call with someone. He was letting someone pick a piece from his private collections. The young man was secretly shocked. Who on earth was this important person that got him to offer his own collection? These paintings had all been preserved in good states by the glass cabinet. Not knowing much about them, Bessy casually glanced past them and pointed to the painting in the middle. That one. Her voice was young and girly. The young man lowered his head and thought this voice didn't sound like the mysterious female war reporter. It sounded much younger. He was thinking of this when Giant Crocodile hung up. After a long while, he finally heard his boss's voice.
"Tell someone to bring out the painting."
"Yes, sir." He took out his phone to carry out the order, but fell into a daze as he glanced at the painting his boss had pointed out. Back at the Highline Apartments, Bessy hung up and returned to dinner. Michael and the others had finished eating and were waiting for her. Rosemary picked up her glass of wine and casually asked, "Who was that?" Bessy thought for a while and replied, "My friend, I told him to send me something." Rosemary had only casually asked and didn't dig further to find out who the friend was. Instead, she discussed the Clark family's event. The next day, Bessy went to the laboratory as usual. She studied her thesis until 2 p.m. and always arrived on the dot. On the other hand, Mr. Rostron and the others were truly research madmen and were present whenever she arrived in the laboratory. As usual, Bessy sat down with her computer in the corner and wrote her thesis. Mr. Rostron hadn't seen her since yesterday afternoon and looked up after finishing his phase experiment to see Bessy sitting at the outermost area, flipping through a book. He pushed his glasses up and lightly said to Sarah,
"Tell her to come in."
Stunned, Sarah stared at him, then turned to look at Bessy. She pursed her lips and went outside. She lightly knocked on Bessy's table and said, "Mr. Rostron asked you to come in." Then she turned and went back inside. In the middle of typing her thesis, Bessy also paused. Mr. Rostron never allowed her to step into the innermost experiment area. This was indeed a strange request. Turning off her computer, she stood up, slowly put on some protective clothing and headed inside. Helping Mr. Rostron in the innermost experimental area, Elijah saw her and mouthed, "Congratulations." Mr. Rostron only asked Bessy to help out with a few things. Bessy spent the remaining time watching his experiment. As a special researcher, his experimental data was complicated, and ordinary people couldn't catch up with his rhythm. Bessy, on the other hand, learned much while observing him on the sidelines. Despite having much fewer hands-on opportunities than Sarah and Elijah, her learning rate left them in disbelief. In the afternoon break, Elijah and Bessy went to the changing room together.
"Mr. Rostron usually takes at least a month to warm up to a stranger,"
said Elijah in a lowered voice.
"You've only been here a week."
Episode 358. You're doing a paper? Changing into her coat, Bessy just silently smiled, her eyes clear and relaxed. She always spent her afternoon break reading books in the library. Back in the innermost area of the laboratory, Sarah and Elijah were still working. Holding a piece of experimental equipment, Sarah turned to Mr. Rostron and asked in a forcibly casual voice, "Mr. Rostron, is our assistant Bessy coming in next time?" Walking over to his computer with a light expression, Mr. Rostron nodded and said,
"Aren't you and Elijah preparing for a domestic competition?"
Upon hearing this explanation, Sarah's expression changed. Thankfully, Mr. Rostron had only mentioned this and didn't explain further. Sarah walked out with a sigh of relief. But inside, Mr. Rostron opened a document and suddenly thought of something. He pulled open a drawer and took out Bessy's document, which he had kept. He had casually put it inside his desk when Sarah handed it to him last time. The experimental equipment was surely used correctly, and he had also asked Sarah and Elijah yesterday to confirm that the experiment was Bessy's. It was such a high fluctuation in the data, even Mr. Rostron was shocked. But he hadn't seen her at all yesterday, and only let her enter the laboratory this morning to help him do several experiments. Her movements were calm, and although she was unclear about a few things, she immediately reacted after small reminders from him. Thinking of this, he pulled out the document from inside the brown portfolio. Every year, files for new members of the laboratory would be recorded, including the basics of their previous registrations, exams, and results from the laboratory assessment. Thus, the professors of each laboratory and the research institute could evaluate the potential of these new students. These new members were indeed all talented geniuses from Northwestern University and the University of Chicago, as Sarah had expressed previously, but they were at a much lower level than the research madmen in the laboratory and the research institute. Every year, only 1 or 2 new members of the laboratory were outstanding enough to be selected by a teacher in the major laboratories. But these 1 or 2 people had been trained by professors or researchers previously before being selected to enter the laboratory. For example, Luke had been picked by a researcher of the Research Institute in advance during the first half of the year, before he participated in the January training. Since Bessy's hands-on ability was a little beyond Mr. Rostron's expectations, he wanted to see her laboratory evaluation. He turned to the first page and read the general admission information. Bessy Miller, first year. Major, Computer Science and Nuclear Engineering. A new student? She had gotten into the laboratory even while studying a double major. Turning the first page, Mr. Rostron's face, which had remained impassive throughout the experiment, finally cracked in astonishment. This information was simply too shocking for him. A new student got into the laboratory? What about her assessment? He continued to flip the pages. Registration qualifications, 10 points. Laboratory assessment, written exam, 300. Physics laboratory assessment test, 100. Comprehensive laboratory evaluation, 10. The comprehensive evaluation of the laboratory had full marks of 10. Because the comprehensive manual evaluation involved subjective questions, unless a student was so outstanding that the person in charge of the laboratory couldn't help marveling, it was extremely rare to score full marks. If she had gotten a full mark of 100, she must have done the S-level experiment. The qualifications points for the evaluations in both her majors were also full marks. Feeling faintly hot, Mr. Rostron turned on the computer in front of him, not yet reacting to the situation. He looked down again at the information in his hand, startled. It had never occurred to him that this new member who came to his laboratory had scored full marks. Mr. Rostron? Elijah took a printed copy of the underground reactor report and handed it to him. Mr. Rostron didn't respond to his call. He only reacted after a long while.
Elijah, what do you think of the new student?
Mr. Rostron pushed up his glasses. Stunned, Elijah said,
She's pretty good at hands-on experiments.
He had watched her do a reactor experiment yesterday. Mr. Rostron sat down and slightly nodded. That day at noon, Anne was standing outside the gate of the Park Place apartments. She had her phone to her ear and was talking to Grace. On the other end of the phone, Grace's voice was mixed with inexplicable emotions.
Your father is a fish out of water.
Anne had felt stabbed in the heart when she heard of the Miller family's prestige. She looked up at the apartment building in front of her. Although the Park Place apartments weren't as good as the Highline apartments, it was still a very wealthy community, with properties worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She laughed at herself. No wonder all my sister wears are custom-made clothes. Has my father forgotten he has another daughter? Her grip tightened and her hands turned pale. Those without identity records verified by the apartment owner couldn't enter the Park Place apartments at will, so she waited outside. Wrapped in a coat, she waited for a long time before James returned, carrying 2 big bags of vegetables. He wore a well-cut-down jacket, and other than his demeanor being a little stiff, everything else was a world away from when she had last seen him. If it weren't for his familiar face, she wouldn't even believe it was him. Dad? Anne pulled off her scarf and took a step forward. James heard a familiar voice. He glanced up and immediately saw her standing at the gates. He paused, seemed to think of something, and suddenly ran through the gate with a drastic change of expression. Shocked, the security guard thought he had met a robber and came out with a taser. Outside, Anne, who was ready to speak, stared at James's back and only realized after a long time James simply didn't want to see her. After talking to Grace, she had been reluctant to come to see James. But after seeing him living in such a high-end apartment and how Bessy was so popular in school and on the internet, her heart was pounded with regret. If she had known that her father, who previously moved bricks, had such a fate waiting for him, she would have never treated him the way she did in Chicago. She stood by the roadside, her face pale. Screech! A car stopped beside her, and the passenger's window lowered to reveal the face of a middle-aged man.
The 4th son of the Miller family wants to see you.
At 2 p.m., Bessy returned to the laboratory with her backpack after checking the materials she wanted to quote in the library. Mr. Rostron was still doing experiments in the innermost laboratory. Taking out her computer and scanning her finished thesis from beginning to end, Bessy then organized and designed the charts for the paper before logging into her mailbox. She clicked on the new email button and sent the thesis to the submission email.
Bessy.
Behind her, Elijah came over with a cup.
You're doing a paper?
Yes, a thesis. She closed the submission email. She was too fast, or Elijah would have seen the familiar email address of the SCI Science and Technology Journal.
You only just got here and you're already writing a research paper?
Elijah looked away and smiled.
What research is it on?
The reactor. She was waiting for the journal to review her paper now, so she closed the paper files with a relaxed expression. Elijah nodded and looked at Mr. Rostron.
Mr. Rostron wants you to come inside.
Bessy put away her books and followed Elijah in. Inside, Mr. Rostron proceeded to assign afternoon tasks to them. He pointed to the current magnetic field debugger.
Calculate the best magnetic field according to my simulation requirements.
Previously, Sarah and Elijah were responsible for this kind of work. Sarah calculated the preliminary data while Elijah helped Mr. Rostron adjust the magnetic field accordingly. But today, Bessy was also present. Sarah pursed her lips and silently glanced at her. She was much quieter and more solemn than before as she calculated the data on her computer. Bessy wasn't anxious. She stood near Elijah's experimental table and watched him do the experiment for 2 hours before going to calculate the magnetic field and current. After 2 hours, at a little over 6 p.m., Bessy was composing a simulation map while testing the best data. Her phone lit up with a message from Michael asking when she was leaving today. She thought about it and told him 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, she finished calculating the data, printed it out, and passed it to Elijah with cold fingers. Beside him, Sarah was still calculating the cumbersome experimental data and didn't notice this happening. Intensely staring at the pile of magnetic fields and about to collapse, Elijah was stunned to see Bessy pass him the data. Since Mr. Rostron was still busy beside him, and Sarah was still calculating the data, he lowered his voice and said in surprise, "You're done?" Bessy nodded. He took a look at it. "So fast?" After bidding farewell to him, Bessy packed her bags and then went to the changing room. She left once she had changed. Michael's car was stopped not far from the laboratory, and he was standing beside it, wearing a black cashmere coat that was unbuttoned, revealing the black shirt inside. The silver double-breasted buttons reflected the cold light. He was holding his phone and seemed to be calling someone, but when he saw her approaching, he said a few more words and then hung up.
"What stupid experiment makes you leave at 6 p.m. every day?"
He opened the car door for her and then took the keys. Propping her chin up, Bessy unhurriedly said, "I've finished writing my thesis and I'm waiting for its review. Principal White's ICNE international competition was the top priority following that. She had studied for 2 days during the weekend and had some ideas for this research, but she didn't know if Principal White would agree for her teammates to be composed entirely of new students." An hour after Bessy left the laboratory, Sarah calculated her ideal answer. Episode 359, Bessy's Calculation.
"You're done?"
The laboratory was very large, and Mr. Rostron walked over from the other corner where he usually worked. "I just finished it." Sarah took out her printed paper and walked over to the reactors built by Mr. Rostron. Elijah heard this and took out Bessy's paper.
"Bessy also gave me a copy of the data."
Mr. Rostron glanced at the data in Elijah's hands. Without looking at Bessy's data, Sarah silently stood in front of the machine. She adjusted the current and magnetic field density to the data she had calculated. The experimental reactors had been fine-tuned by Mr. Rostron in the afternoon. The various reactors couldn't exceed 0.001 error, an error achievable only by highly trained researchers. As for the strength and size of the magnetic field, precise calculations were also pertinent. After adjusting the magnetic field according to her calculations, Sarah stared at the reactor and the energy calculating instrument. After 5 minutes, the reaction was complete. The instrument calculating the energy recorded the largest data in the reaction energy, 2.54 kilowatts. Seeing this data, she sighed in relief. This energy was 0.27 kilowatts more than the previous one. Although it was mostly attributed to Mr. Rostron's rather successful reaction material ratio, her data was evidently not problematic. She suppressed the inner rush of joy she felt. Mr. Rostron's expression remained unchanged, and he just nodded at her before lightly saying to Elijah,
"Elijah, use Bessy's calculation to do the magnetic field."
Sarah's eyes fell on the data in Elijah's hands and narrowed silently. She stepped aside and let Elijah come over. She wasn't very bothered about the data in Elijah's hands. They had followed Mr. Rostron for 2 days, and although he had been immersed in the research, she had still learned a lot from him. Thus, she naturally was confident in her data calculation. She was thinking of this as she watched Elijah. He adjusted the magnetic field according to Bessy's calculations and stepped aside. 5 minutes later, the data instrument record table was updated. The reaction energy, 2.93 kilowatts. It almost reached the saturation of 3 kilowatts. Sarah had been leaning on the experiment bench and looking casually at the data on the instrument. Upon seeing the result, her casual expression became astonished, and she slowly stood up straight. In addition to her, even Elijah was stunned for a moment. He tilted his head and stared at Mr. Rostron in a daze.
"Mr. Rostron, the new student has calculated your reactor data to the extreme."
Mr. Rostron stared at the number 2.93, and his eyes, which had always been cold and unwavering, lit up a little.
"This new student is very talented,"
he finally said after a long pause. While helping him in the laboratory for the past 2 years, neither of them had heard a word of praise. This was the first time he had praised someone in the laboratory. They exchanged glances. In the evening, they returned to their dormitories after work. While changing in the changing room, Elijah couldn't help but sigh.
The new student is too amazing. I think she only spent 2 hours calculating the data today.
Before he finished speaking, Sarah put on her jacket and said, "Worry about yourself." Mr. Rostron said he would only accept one student, and Sarah had originally thought her competitor was only Elijah. But now, Bessy was also a competition. Neither Rosemary nor Joshua came to the Highline Apartments that evening, but Patrick had returned. They were sitting on the sofa downstairs after dinner.
"You're playing with your life."
Michael sat beside Bessy, one hand placed behind her on the sofa. He looked down at her game and pointed at one of the level pages with his slender fingers.
"No wonder you're 20 seconds faster than me."
He summed up the reason why his clearance record wasn't as good as hers. Patrick was speechless. Playing games with a top hacker? Michael, are you crazy?
"The headquarters have completely moved to Evanston."
Patrick coughed and then opened up the computer page to show him.
"Take a look."
Michael took the computer to check. Bessy also turned off the game interface. She then opened Twitter to find a new message from Giant Crocodile.
"I've already sent out the goods. It's expected to arrive on Friday."
The paintings in his hands were antiques and rather troublesome to get past customs, especially at the border. He had asked someone to take it over personally. Bessy acknowledged his message and then clicked on Principal White's profile. "Can I choose my own teammates for my project?" 2 or 3 minutes later, Principal White replied to her.
"Yes."
Bessy thought for a while and honestly wrote, "I choose my classmates." Principal White did not respond. He wanted to take back his words. He called her immediately. While Michael discussed the company's affairs, Bessy went to the balcony to answer the phone, her voice clear and cold. "Principal White."
"Yes."
Mr. White paused and sternly asked,
"Are you sure you want to choose fellow new students?"
Although she was still a new student herself, Principal White knew she was different. After hearing that she wanted to select teammates who were also new students, the corners of his lips couldn't help but twitch. "Yes, I've already touched on the research project you mentioned a long time ago." Bessy laid on the open terrace, overlooking the university town, her eyelashes drooping and covering her dim eyes. "Principal White, my grandpa has already researched this project before." Principal White stayed silent for a long while. Bessy waited 3 minutes before hearing Principal White softly sigh.
"Give me the list of names then."
"Okay," Bessy nodded, tapping the balcony lazily with her fingers. "It should be fine for them to participate in the international competition, right? I don't know if they can take the pressure." Principal White massaged his temples. All his previous grief disappeared. Now he was almost having a breakdown.
"So your classmates might not even agree?"
That Friday in the laboratory, Mr. Rostron called Bessy.
"Bessy, come and prepare the raw materials."
Mr. Rostron stepped aside and let Bessy do it. Sarah stood at the side with her lips pressed tightly. Students in the laboratory were no different from interns at other places, and the professors and researchers in the laboratory wouldn't let students touch important experiments easily. As for the raw materials for the reaction, only Elijah had adjusted it once, and in 2 years, Sarah had only assisted on the side. How long had Bessy been there? Sarah was the only one who noticed. Even Bessy herself was aware of the changes in Mr. Rostron's attitude towards her. They were studying Mr. Rostron's theoretical research today and didn't have much hands-on stuff to do. Although upset and vexed, Sarah didn't torture herself by staying, and instead took her computer to the outermost area to write her SCI paper. She was nearing the end of her thesis, and it could be submitted once Mr. Rostron reviewed it. Thinking of this, she managed to suppress her frustration. In the laboratory, watching how at ease and fast Bessy was, Elijah sincerely admired her.
"Bessy, your hands are too stable. If you weren't a new student, I would suspect you had been in the laboratory for several years."
Putting down the instrument in her hand, Bessy lightly smiled. "Thank you." The laboratory had always been cold and deserted, so even the sound of objects clinking against each other was extremely clear. Mr. Rostron stood by Bessy's experiment for a while and suddenly remembered something. He turned to Elijah.
Elijah, how many people do you have on your competition team?
4, Elijah replied.
Then you still lack one. Can you add one more?
He looked at him.
This is also beneficial for you.
Eliza naturally wouldn't reject Mr. Rostron, so he smiled and said,
It should be no problem. We're still preparing.
Mr. Rostron turned around and looked at Bessy with a pair of cold eyes.
Bessy, you can participate in the project together with your seniors. It's the top aerospace propulsion project in America, and it will be very useful for you to get a good ranking.
Be it entering the research institute or officially becoming a researcher, the participating scientific researchers and the content of the international cooperation projects were extremely important. Mr. Rostron remembered from her document a few days ago that she majored in computer science. The space thruster would be a professional achievement to her. At first, Bessy wanted to say that she had an international project. She had never heard Principal White talk of this domestic aerospace project, but thinking of the kindness Mr. Rostron and Elijah had shown, she couldn't reject it. The space thruster was much simpler to her than Principal White's project. After all, she had learned computer science from Mr. Cheatham. Principal White had given her top-level resources, but it didn't mean other resources weren't important. Elijah put away the documents.
I'll discuss it with the other 3 people in the evening. We started last month and we'll have to resubmit our names.
He was the team leader of this project, which had started a month ago, but if Mr. Rostron said Bessy might be able to help them, he might be right. During lunch, he filled in a new registration form and set it aside. Except for Sarah, the other teammates were boys. Sarah reached out and picked up the registration form. We're re-registering? She looked down and saw the 2 words on the bottom line. Bessy Miller.
I wanted our new student to join us.
Elijah didn't get to finish his words. Glancing up coldly, Sarah remained silent and directly tore the registration form in half. None of the 3 people present expected Sarah to make this move. The atmosphere seemed to freeze for a moment. Elijah's words stopped halfway and he stared at her, pursing his lips. His always gentle and elegant face was laced with a thin layer of anger.
Sarah?
The expression on Sarah's face became even more enraged. She turned to Elijah and sharply said, We've been doing this project for a month already and have already developed a plan. How could we let her join at this time? Should we just let her sit and enjoy the success? She had felt bitter ever since Mr. Rostron let Bessy participate in the experiment a few days ago. She had taken note of Mr. Rostron placing value on Bessy. As a student of the researcher, Sarah wasn't narrow-minded. When she first arrived, she had endured for more than a month before she asked Mr. Rostron to let her in and help. Only then did she gain his trust. But now, his attitude towards Bessy made her blind with jealousy. Episode 360. Hearing it from Bessy is more impactful.
You also know that we haven't studied much content this month.
Elijah reasoned with her patiently.
Mr. Rostron said that our new student might even help us in this aspect.
Even without Mr. Rostron, just based on Bessy's obvious talent from her calculations yesterday, Elijah was also willing to bring her in. Slowly crumpling the paper into a ball, Sarah looked up at him and sneered. Help us? She's a new student who just entered the laboratory. Wants to join our team? Elijah, go back and tell her to obediently stay in the laboratory for 3 to 5 years before joining such a competition. Only then can she tell us she'll be able to help. She casually threw the paper onto the table and left with her phone and keys without eating. The researchers were all very particular about qualifications. A new student like Bessy was no different from interns who had just joined a large company. Sarah and Elijah had worked in the research institute for years to reach their current status. It was extremely rare for Bessy, who had yet to enter the research institute, to encounter a special researcher. It had only happened because Mr. Rostron had come to do experiments in the laboratory. Sarah and Elijah separated unhappily. The 2 remaining teammates exchanged glances. Both of them were PhD students and knew that Elijah and Sarah were working in the experiment room of a special researcher. The general direction of their project was under the guidance of Mr. Rostron, so they weren't offended with the new member joining halfway, especially since she was in the same laboratory as Elijah. However, They didn't dare to casually join this dispute.
Elijah.
The two of them glanced at Elijah and took on the role of the mediator.
Don't fight with Sarah over a new member.
These two wanted to de-escalate the tension. Sarah looked extremely angry, and it seemed there wasn't a possibility of resolving the conflict on her side. So they could only work on Elijah. One had the same leadership position as Elijah in the project, while the other was a little lower status than them. Although these two members talked about peace, in fact, the balance of their hearts was already biased towards Sarah's side. It didn't matter how many others were added, but they couldn't do without the two core members, Sarah and Elijah. In the afternoon, Mr. Rostron's experiment had progressed to the middle stage, and he had asked Bessy to calculate the data for the various magnetic field currents. Elijah was full of worries when he returned from lunch. Once Bessy finished calculating the magnetic field current data, he went to her a little apologetically and lowered his voice.
Bessy, I'm sorry. I can't resubmit the application.
He was too embarrassed to tell her Sarah had torn the application form. Putting down her computer and hearing this, Bessy wasn't disappointed and just lightly smiled. It's okay. Thank you for your kindness. This made Elijah feel even more guilty. He returned to his workbench with a heavy heart and tried finding other competition teams with an open slot. But he couldn't find any. Unexpectedly, Bessy wasn't bothered at all. Sitting down, she even opened her Twitter, clicked on Kara, Kai, and Gary's profiles, and pulled them into a group chat. Kara was worried about this unusual behavior. Oh no, Bessy, have you been hacked? Kai was especially excited.
Bessy, are you bringing us to play games?
Gary was the most natural and didn't make any assumptions, but just asked what was the matter. Bessy propped her chin up and replied, Nothing much. There's an international science and technology competition and I lack a few teammates. Are you guys interested? Gary replied quickly,
The popular robot market research at Northwestern University and the University of Chicago recently?
Because of the intelligent robot butlers released by the World Poker Tour, universities in America and abroad had adopted an intelligent research style. The science and technology industries had become hot this year, and it was expected that college entrance examination results for next year would have higher scores in those categories. Kara replied with a smiley face, I like this. Kai, whose mind was still on the poker tournament, remembered that he was the last in the class.
Can I do it?
Bessy slowly typed her response. I will submit the forms if there are no objections. The other two very readily agreed while Kai still felt a little torn. It took a few days to get feedback after submitting the form. Tomorrow was the weekend. Bessy made an appointment with them to talk about the research project in detail next Monday, and all three of them sent an OK emoji. After confirming their participation, she notified Principal White. She sent their information to him. Principal White replied with a string of ... and then asked,
There's one space left. Do you want to include anyone else?
Bessy propped up her chin. No. She exited Twitter after confirming the list of names with Principal White. Of course, she didn't know that after she exited Twitter, the three people unanimously started searching for a bunch of information on robots and intelligence materials in the Northwestern University database. She reopened the project that Principal White wanted her to study. It was the collision and absorption of gamma rays and alpha rays between electrons and the new radioactive substances that created. Gamma rays had the greatest impact on the human body, caused by the nuclear energy transition of the reactor. They eroded the nucleic acids, proteins, and enzymes that led to normal operations of various cells in the body. The loss of function of the carrier proteins even caused cell senescence and death. Regarding this, only the medical search reports issued by Daniel and Michael had overcome the problem of the carrier protein activity. They had developed an enzyme to activate the carrier protein. However, Bertha hadn't survived until then. They had fought against this research their whole lives, but she could not escape the fate of radiation. Bessy pursed her lips and flipped to the next page. At 6 p.m., Michael took his car keys and went out to meet Bessy. He left Marvin alone in the apartment. Not long after that, Rosemary came in and waited for Bessy to get home from school. She wanted to discuss Sunday's matters with her. While waiting for Bessy to return, she crossed her legs and sorted through a pile of mail. After Marvin greeted her, he sat down at the dining table, took out his phone, and chatted with Captain Baldwin. Captain Baldwin had sent him a message.
"When can I see Miss Miller?"
Marvin replied,
"The day after tomorrow."
He was very concise and clear, as if he knew Bessy's schedule inside and out. Captain Baldwin admired him very much.
"Thank you, Mr. Clark."
He was about to say, "No problem," when he heard someone knocking on the door. He opened the door to see a man in black, who looked to be a trainer, holding a package. He didn't look like a package delivery man.
"Hello, does Miss Miller live here?"
The man in black politely asked. Marvin nodded expressionlessly. The man handed the package to him.
"This is Miss Miller's package."
Then, without even asking for Marvin's signature, he turned and directly entered the elevator. His style was completely different from other couriers. It wasn't the first time he had received something for Bessy, so he expressionlessly put the package on the sofa, waiting for her return.
"Bessy's package?"
Rosemary looked up. Marvin casually nodded, then returned to the stool, turning on his phone again. Rosemary gave it another glance. The package had been addressed by hand. It seemed like the person who wrote it was very irritable and wild. What kind of messy address was this? Rosemary stared at it for a long time, trying to decipher who the package was from. LB? IB? LV? VW? LW? Bessy was still in the laboratory. After typing up the last of the data, Bessy turned sideways and said with slightly drooping eyelashes, "Elijah." Taking the data from her, he glanced at her and couldn't help but say,
"Bessy, I'll find you another project."
Before she could reply to him, Mr. Rostron looked up from his busy work and said in a cold voice,
"Your project members have already been finalized?"
Elijah pursed his lips and nodded, about to give the speech he prepared. Sarah, who had just come in to get equipment, politely said, "Sorry, but our other two teammates don't agree to have another newcomer." In order to appease Sarah and get her to return, the other two teammates had specially called her in the afternoon to comfort her. The two could afford to offend neither Sarah nor Elijah, so this wasn't particularly surprising. Remaining silent, Elijah turned and adjusted the magnetic field with the data Bessy gave him.
"Your two teammates disagreed?"
Mr. Rostron glanced at Sarah, then turned back to Bessy. He paused for a moment, then continued.
"Since those two teammates don't want you to team up with them, there's no need to force them. Pay attention to the projects initiated by the laboratory and the school during this period. I'll ask other professors if..."
Although Mr. Rostron had never accepted a student, many doctoral students under his guidance had become professors. As for Elijah's team, Mr. Rostron concentrated on researching and couldn't do anything to force them. Hearing this, Sarah only faintly smiled. She remained silent and kept her hands by her sides. While putting the book she had borrowed from the library earlier into her backpack, Bessy shook her head upon hearing what Mr. Rostron said. "Thank you, Mr. Rostron, but I already have a research project on my hands, and have formed a team with my classmates." Hearing this, both Elijah and Mr. Rostron were surprised. Mr. Rostron remained silent, while Elijah showed his joy.
"That's great."
Sarah leaned slightly on the table, staring at Bessy, pursing her lips in curiosity. "I didn't expect a freshman to have a project as well. As far as I know, there aren't many projects at Northwestern University right now. Which project did you participate in?" Zipping her backpack up, Bessy looked up at her and unhurriedly said, "The ICNE finals." Without waiting for her reaction, she politely nodded to Mr. Rostron and Elijah, then directly left with her backpack. ICNE was the highest project award for students still studying in the science and technology field. Writing 10 SCI papers with an impact factor greater than 25 wasn't as good as a medal from the ICNE final. New students in the science and technology department might not know what this competition was, but it was a research project that every graduate student desperately wanted to join.